I'll call the order of the meeting of the Building Board of Examiners and Regulation Examiners and Appeals for March 17th, 2016. If you have your cell phone and haven't silenced it yet, if you would please do so to keep the disruptions down. Would you call roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Straight? Mr. Fredine?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Cowling? Present. Mr. McCann?
Present.
Mr. Feller?
Here.
Mr. Hawkinson?
Here.
Mr. Field?
Here.
Mr. Loken?
Here.
Mr. McKee?
Here.
And Mr. Boney.
Here.
Okay, and for staff, Ms. Walsh?
Present.
Mr. Gisler?
Here.
Mr. Fosberg?
Here.
And Mr. Ring.
Here.
Everyone is present and accounted for.
Thank you.
Except Mr. Hickle, who said he was
Mark him as
half and half.
when he comes in, right. We've got an agenda before us. I'll entertain a motion for acceptance of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the agenda.
Moved by Mr. Steele,
Second.
by Mr. Ferdine. Any comments on the agenda?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before you start anything that requires vote, we should probably settle the question of whether or not Mr. Brady is eligible to vote at this time. Apparently, he wasn't able to make it down to have the clerk swear him in prior to this meeting. So the question is, he needs to be sworn in to service before he can act.
Understand, and I understand Sam was looking in to see if he had that power and authority. Did you find anything?
My phone's letting me down. Sam Severn with Municipal Attorney's Office. Here to try to help with some of these curveballs. That was one that I didn't anticipate. My thought would be, because I have the packet, that's the orientation packet from last time I came here for an orientation, and there's a written form of the oath that says that you've done necessary ethics disclosures and that kind of thing, and it tells me he's done that. This is totally off the cuff, but I would think if both the municipality and the party appealing said, sure, it's okay for this hearing, that I don't really see what the problem could be then. Whether it's, you're technically supposed to have had the oath or not, I don't see how anybody could really complain about it if both sides just said, sure, for tonight's hearing, he's free to participate.
Is that acceptable to the municipality?
Sam is the municipality.
So I think we'd consent to it.
I'll take that as a yes. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Bender?
I'm not sure I understand. Vote on what?
CBE has not been sworn in by the municipal clerk yet.
But he's acting as part of the board?
He's been accepted to the board and just hasn't gone through this formality.
Yeah, that would be acceptable.
That would be acceptable. That gives us one more person to be on the vote, and I appreciate that. Any other discussion regarding the agenda? Hearing none, I'll accept the agenda. We have a set of meeting minutes from February 18th before us. I hope everybody's had a chance to take a peek at those, and I'll entertain a motion to accept those. Somebody that was here?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Loken?
I'll second.
Second by Mr.
I'll second the motion.
Any comments regarding the minutes? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll accept those. new business this evening is the de novo hearing of BCI-01-2016. Regarding Otis Elevator and an interpretation before the municipality regarding labeling of elevators. Very brief. This is a discretionary de novo hearing. In its sole discretion, it is determined by the majority of vote of 50% plus one of the members not disqualified from voting under this subsection as provided below. The building board may accept an appeal decided by a three-member hearing panel, in whole or in part, for a de novo hearing by the full board. Otis has requested the full board look at the decisions made by the three-member panel, and I'm trying to find the date of that particular meeting.
The first three-member panel meeting was January 28th.
January 28, 2016.
Correct.
Thank you. This would be a vote by the members present, less the three-member panel, which consisted of myself, Mr. Cowling, and Mr. Help me with the name real quick.
Mr. McKee.
Yes, Mr. McKee. The decision to accept and hear is based solely on the packet that you've been presented prior to the meeting. There's not a testimony that happens with that, or presentation by either the municipality or the appellant at this time. Based on that, does everybody understand the rules per se?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Steele?
Straight.
Straight, excuse me. Bill?
Can I request clarification? My understanding is there's potential change in the language that has or has not been voted on. Can I just understand, what is the status of that change and specific to the voting on de novo?
There is a change in the statute effective April 1. So as of March 17, we are still under the old statute. So we need 50% of the seated board plus one. So we determined that was...
Minus the three.
Right. So we have,
Right.
we do have 15 members.
Last time we determined we needed 8. So we have, how many present did we count? Including Mr. Brady? 13. Less 3 is 10. So we got to get 8 votes to rehear the de novo. Does that clarify that? Okay, based on that, I'll entertain a motion to hear the de
Chair?
novo.
I
Ms.
think
Walsh.
it's proper at this point for you to turn, since you're one of the three-member panels, you need to turn the proceedings over to the vice chair or whomever was not on the three-member panel.
Okay, I didn't think it would be a problem for just hearing it, but I'm willing to do that. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ferdine then.
Abundance of caution.
Do we have a motion for the de novo hearing?
Mr. Chair, I move for rehearing, de novo hearing. Do we need to read off the case number? Or? BCI 01-2016.
Second.
That was seconded by Sterling. All right, is there any, I believe we will go into a discussion at this point. Is there any comments or discussion on the merits of whether to go forward on de novo? Mr. Steele.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe I'll be supporting the motion. I've read the information in the packets. I feel comfortable with the deliberation and the decision reached. Formed the motion, however, in the positive to keep it in that light, but I don't believe I would be supporting it.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Straight.
I'd like to at least state my mind and ask Mr. Steele to reconsider, because I feel at this point where we are is we're being asked as a board to hear a question. It's already been heard by the three-panel board. The next step is us. As a citizen working with the building officers here, the staff, I think we've all been in that situation where it can sometimes feel like you're dealing with a big faceless bureaucracy, and we really are the only alternative avenue that citizens have to question decisions by the building board. And I feel that if a citizen that makes the effort to both appeal to the three-member panel and feels strongly enough to appeal to us, I feel that's really the very purpose of the board. That's why we're here today. That's why we all showed up and came down here on a Thursday evening to enjoy sandwiches and do this meeting. But the very purpose of this board is to hear these appeals, and I feel that by us not taking the time to even hear the appeal, we're doing a disservice both to the appellant and the very purpose of this board. So for that reason, I strongly feel that we should vote to hear this de novo. Thank you.
Any other?
Well, I'd let others go first before I...
Any other comments? Mr. Steele?
I'm very aware of and sensitive to that issue. I think the point of departure that we're dealing with tonight occurred quite a while ago when the whole thought of the three-panel was introduced, and it was to expedite the decision, get a shorter, smaller group that had the wherewithal and the expertise to render decision on this. And I don't think the avenue of appeal is over. There's always, the decision of the board can be appealed to the courts if one feels strongly enough about it. But I just think that I'm wanting to buy into the system of the smaller group and the decisions made. And again, based on what I've read, I can see how the decision was reached and can be supporting of that. And so, in fairness, I don't want to slight an individual for an opportunity to present their piece to a larger forum, but at the same time, we have not the requirement that we have to always hear these in the larger format. I think it's set up that we have this choice to decide based on what we've read in our packets in preparation for the meeting if it warrants rehearing or opening it up again. But again, there are other avenues to pursue this beyond us. And those always do exist.
Royal?
Yeah. I guess I've read the same material, and I guess I feel that the appellant does need to be heard. I would be voting to rehear this so that everybody here has a chance to vote on it in how they feel and based on how they interpret the code as well, based on all the information that we've been given. So I'll be voting to rehear it.
Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote, please? This would be in favor of the de novo rehearing.
Mr. Field. Mr. Straight.
Yes.
Mr. McCann. Mr. Feller. Mr. Ferdine.
Yes.
Mr. Steele.
No?
Mr. Loken.
Yes.
Mr. Hawkinson.
Yes.
And Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Relinquish the gavel or responsibility over back to the chair.
Eight to one. It passes that we will hear that. Rearrange my mind here. If I can start with the summary of the issues. This is a handout that was in our packets with 7 bullet points on a municipality letterhead. Summary of issues: identification of elevators with numbers, letters, etc. has been required in elevator code books in the National Electric Code for many years. The various code additions have changed.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Just a point of order. Staff's supposed to present the case.
I thought last time we asked this be presented.
Basically, I just read the summary of issues, but it is a staff presentation.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Yes, this case came about as a,
Mr. Chair, do we need to swear in the witnesses?
yes,
Yes, we do.
yeah. Good point of order.
Good point, thank you. If everybody would raise their right hand, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Thank you.
We missed those guys. Did they? They got it. They do.
That's for people that are presenting, not to the board.
It's been a long day.
Thank you for having that, and I missed it. Okay,
Okay.
Ms. Walsh.
So this case came about in response to an interpretation made by me regarding the question of whether or not when a new elevator is installed and it increases the number of elevators in a building, there's new labeling requirements, and whether or not that triggers the requirement to also label the other elevators in the building if they're not yet labeled. So the identification of elevators with numbers and letters has been required for many years. Various code additions have changed the basic requirements for when numbers to occur and the location of where those numbers are to be placed. For new construction projects, until the A17.1 2004 elevator code numbering was required on certain components, until that code, numbering was required on certain components when there was more than one elevator in a hoistway or machine room. For new construction projects, the same code, the numbering requirements expanded to include each elevator in the building. The A17.1-2010 elevator code expanded the identification requirements even more to not just new construction, but also for 3 types of modernization projects. Development Services has interpreted A17.1-2010 to mean that any new installation or modernization project triggers the need for all of elevators in a building to be numbered, not just the elevator that's being installed or modernized. So, key point, triggers the need. Development Services has noted the building owner is responsible for ensuring the numbering of other elevators occurs in conjunction with the new installation or modernization, whether the task is done by the contractor doing the new installation or other persons associated with building maintenance. So the interpretation was that having the new installation does require that the other items happen, though the interpretation was not specific or allowed leeway as to who had to do that numbering, but just that it had to happen at the time of the new construction was being carried out. And the appellant disagrees with this interpretation.
Any questions regarding the outline of the agenda or item before us? Hearing none,
Just one question.
Oh, Mr. Steele.
It's been presented that all of the packet information we received was what was available for the three-panel hearing. I'm not seeing dates or numbers on all of them, though I've read all the sheets, but I just want to make sure that everything that we're seeing is reflective of that. And then maybe during comments afterwards, we can talk about putting dates and numbers on sheets.
Correct. The packet that you have is the same information that the three-member panel received in their original packet, and then at the hearing, an additional material was presented by the appellant, so that was also part of the original hearing on which the three-member panel based their decision. So you have the same items, no more, no less.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Mr. Boney?
Mr. Culling?
We did have access to the complete ASME code
That was provided to us during the,
during the hearing. We
hearing,
had that,
yes.
which was helpful, and I believe it's here tonight as well. Correct? We don't have it?
May I speak?
yes, Mr.
So all of the copies of the code sections that are applicable to the appeal are in the packet. I didn't bring a code book. I don't know if anybody else did.
It was helpful for us that night because we could see how the code was arranged and not just in excerpts,
Right.
is how we used it.
So, question for Ms. Klender. We had that here at the last de novo. It's not here tonight?
No, I asked Kurt at the last meeting to bring it and make sure that we brought it again. Our last elevator.
Okay, so we don't have a code book. I didn't bring a code book. I apologize for that. And yeah, I'm not, I mean, if it's, you know, if it's needed, we're not far from getting one. There's always that. It's right down at the building safety office. So it's not far. If anyone wants to wait, I could certainly go get that. But
Mr.
there's
Chair?
not one in the building that I know of.
Ms.
I would offer that we could suspend this portion of the hearing while he goes to get the code book, because I think it should be here because it was used as a reference prior. We can cover the staff reports and some other things and come back in 15 minutes, 20 minutes that it takes him to make the round trip.
Acceptable, Mr. Bender?
I'd like,
First of all, I would, Mr. Chairman, thanks for allowing us this opportunity. I'm not aware of the packet that the board has because my presentation testimony at the three-member panel hearing, nobody asked me for that. I don't believe I gave you a copy, so I don't think the full board has that. I brought copies of it tonight, but it was, no, you know, I was never instructed to submit it as part of that hearing. So do you have it or don't you?
Of which?
Everyone here has your appeal.
The-
Plus the handout that you gave out.
Can I see a copy of it?
Yeah, the packet's in front of you there. And then this is what you handed out that night. Yes, they do.
Mr. Feller?
If the complete code wasn't supplied to the board in advance of this meeting, is it fair to introduce it now? I thought our decision was supposed to be made on the information that was provided in advance that we had an opportunity to review. And not necessarily on maybe what the three-member panel had available to them.
Mr. McKee, do you remember anything that was in that rest of the code that was germane to our making a decision that isn't provided in the package that we have with the one or two excerpt sheets?
No specific information, only that we were able to see the, basically in a physical format, the different parts of the code that's mentioned in what we have in the excerpts here.
Mr. Collin, do you remember anything outside the sheets that we have?
I don't remember specifically, but it helped me to understand how that the sections were referencing back and forth. And just based on my code knowledge, I'm a little leery whenever I don't have a complete code book and I'm just reading excerpts, because the way things reference and how that the paragraph, the chapter is defined in front of that sometimes has great bearing on the meaning. And in this case, it gets referenced around, and we can present that to how that it works, and I think it just helps to see the complete picture. If you just look at the excerpts, it changes the picture a little bit, but I think we would be okay with this package, and I don't see any great problem with it. I think we can explain it out with this, and I think it's okay. I just wanted to mention we did have the complete code book when we did it before.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Field?
I guess that I couldn't agree more. I mean, maybe with 3 people, if you had a code book and you're sitting there up at the table looking at it, but for 11, 12 of us here, I just think that that's not necessary. And they've already indicated that while it made a little bit of difference, I don't think it's going to make a difference in my decision. Or at least that's what I'm thinking right now, and trying to go through that whole code book and reference every section that they identified and try to look at that based on the codes that they're talking about. I don't see how that's going to change what my opinion would be.
Mr. Loken, you're prepared like you have something
I'd
you'd like to say?
to make a motion to continue.
Second.
Any objection to continuing with, without having that reference at fingertip? Hearing none, I think we can continue on that. I thank you for the offer, but for the to expedite the time, I think we can keep going too. Mr. Loken.
I do have a question on the summary to Ms. Walsh. Does the staff consider this a new construction project or a modernization?
This appeal is actually not for a particular project. The appeal was made on the interpretation. Following a project where it came up, the interpretation was, from this point forward, be advised, we shall vigorously remind everyone and we'll get into that at the time, but vigorously remind everyone that we consider this event to trigger labeling, and we'll be making those comments at plan review and at pre-construction time, and reminding people to coordinate the labeling of the elevators. So this isn't specific to a project. This is the interpretation that this is how we'll handle it from this point forward.
Thank you.
Any other comments regarding the case in general? Hearing none, I'll invite Mr. Bender to make his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the only time I've ever gone through this, so I'm kind of a novice, and I'd appreciate if you would give me guidance if you feel it's necessary. For those of you, some of you know, I know some of you I don't, but my name is Paul Bender. I'm the construction superintendent for Otis Elevator. I have been since 2001. I am also been a certified inspector since 2002. I'm a member of the ASME Inspections Committee for the A17-1, and have 28 years in installation, maintenance, and supervision of installation and maintenance of elevators. The packet that you have, I don't know how much we want to rehash this thing. What I have to present tonight is a letter from that I presented to the municipality, but I don't know if, I don't think it was passed out to you guys yet. I have copies of it here for you, but it's a letter written by David McCall, who's our senior manager of worldwide codes development, and he's a member of the ASME A17 Standards Committee. He's the chairman of the A17 Hoistway Committee, which is responsible for 2.29, and he's the chairman of the ASMEA 17 Editorial Committee that's responsible for 1.1.
Mr. Bender, if you can hold on just a moment, we do have copies of that has not been passed out to the members at large here, so if you can give us just a moment.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a point of order? Or
Mr. Steele?
process here? At this point, is it appropriate that now it's before the whole board again for new information to be presented? Or is it again based solely on historical?
It's for us to accept as new information being presented to the board.
I'm wanting to be fair and I want to be upfront, but again, if we're supposed to be basing it only on the information of the original appeal, is this not new information? I just want to get a rendering whether this is appropriate or not before we act.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Walsh?
And Mr. Severin can chime in on this. We had some discussion when the letter was submitted as to whether or not to include it with the packet tonight, but this is de novo, which means of new, which means you're starting all over. So your decision on whether or not to hear, or basically in the first go-around where you're deciding whether or not to rehear it, you were deciding if you felt the three-member panel's decision needed a second look for whatever reason you might think that decision, warranted a second look. So you've made the decision, yes, it does. Then it's de novo, of new. You're starting over, and we start from ground zero, and both sides can present new things. Isn't that correct, Sam?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you were appealing in the court system, you would never get to bring in something new because that's not what the judge had before. But in this, I think because it is de novo, like Sharon described it, I think it's appropriate, but probably something to make a quick motion to accept it, or something. You've acknowledged that it's an issue. So. But I think it's reasonable to accept it.
Based upon the municipality's legal, I make a motion to accept this new information.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion to accept and seconded. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, we'll accept that as additional information. Mr. Bender, you may continue.
Would you like me to read this, or you just want a chance to read it yourselves? Or?
I think just hit a highlight if you would, please.
Right. So the gentleman and Mr. Ryan's aware of this gentleman's credentials, right? He's really the highest up we go in North America for Otis Elevator as far as codes and standards go, and his belief is that the recent decision regarding the requirements of 229.1 have been interpreted incorrectly by the municipality. And then there's, again, several times the sections 1.1.3 and 229.1, the gist of it being that 1.1.3 says Section 2 applies to new installations only, which is new elevators. And he goes on to say that 229.1 applies to new installations only, where the words "each elevator in a building" are used. It means each new elevator being installed in accordance with Part 2, of which Part 2 is for new installations only. It does not apply to any existing elevators that are in a building where a new elevator is being installed. Section 8.7, which according to Section 1.1.3 applies to both new and existing installations, contains references to 229.1, and it contains requirements for alterations and lists certain alterations where compliance with Section 229 is required. This means that when the alterations specified in Section 8.7 are performed, identification of equipment in accordance with 229.1 must be done. The requirements applicable to existing elevators are contained in 8.7, and to avoid repeating the words, there's a reference back to 2.29. These references don't make Section 2.29 applicable to existing elevators. Otis Elevator Company believes the identification of equipment is an important safety issue. We also strongly support interpretation and enforcement of the code as it is written and intended. The relevant wording in sections 1.1.3 and 2.29.1 has been the same for many years through multiple editions of the code. And if the municipality of Anchorage believes there are unique situations pertaining to identification of new and existing equipment in existing buildings, then perhaps a regulation could be developed and proposed to clearly specify the equipment and conditions where it would be applicable. Otis would be willing to contribute to the development of the wording of such a proposal. The recent decision regarding the requirements of Section 229.1 and A17.1 by the Building Board of Regulation Examiners and Appeals is based on a misinterpretation of the code requirements, and we respectfully request that this decision be reconsidered. And so I'm done reading. Can I just elaborate?
Yes, your time.
I'm not sure. You guys know different parts or different codes, IBC, all this stuff. Basically, the elevator code is kind of its own beast. I've been fortunate enough to have been the A17.1 is it ends up being a code because of volunteers that from various parts of the industry. There's representatives from the manufacturers, the authorities having jurisdiction, and it's an all volunteer group. It's really an interesting procedure. I've been lucky enough to be involved in quite a few of them. Otis has supported me to volunteer to be a part of it, and I don't know that it's as straightforward as some other codes might be, but I said this before, and I want to stress it. We can't confuse what someone might think is a good idea with what the code requires. And if, like at the Diamond Mall, for instance, if all the elevators were numbered and you called your daughter and said, meet me by elevator 7, there's a purpose for that in that kind of a context. But the code requires elevators to be numbered for not that reason. It's for emergency personnel, elevator personnel and emergency personnel. And it's the part that's mentioned in there from the elevator code handbook. It's really meant for what we're getting away from nowadays is groups of elevators in the same machine room. You'd have 6 or 8 elevators, and you could imagine if somebody came into that room and they had to shut the power off to a certain elevator, and they were didn't know which one it was. There's a really good reason for having those numbered, both downstairs, upstairs, and on the various things that are mentioned in the code. And I think it's interesting that when we had the original appeal, that the three-member panel that was there, there's two instances here which this was brought up, and one was West High School and one was the Diamond Mall. And it seemed interesting to me that I believe that the outcome from the professionals at that meeting would have been that in both those cases, had you used the definition of building as the building code defines it, that both of those projects would not have warranted that reference on plan review to begin with, based on either a different address or fire separation of buildings. Do you think that's a true statement from that meeting, Mr. Chairman?
I'm not here to testify. I'll let you testify.
Well, I mean, that was mentioned at the meeting, and I thought it was agreed to. I'm not sure what the definition of a building is. I mean, you could call, if it's a different address, apparently that it's not the same building. And if there's fire separations between, apparently, like in West High School, somebody had mentioned that there's numerous fire separations in the confines of that building. So if in that context, would the term or the definition building stop at that firewall or not? If that's the case, then there's a good possibility that in those two projects, plan review and stuff, that perhaps that should not have been noted to begin with, if that definition of the building holds true. My issue with this is that to me, from the get-go, the code's clear. Section 229.1 is for new installations only, because 1.1.3 says that. And for an inspector or a building official to interpret that as to have any other meaning without changing it by local amendment or adoption isn't right. I don't believe that's correct in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely, if the authority having jurisdiction thinks that something like that should be put into place, absolutely, they have the authority to do that. But the way that this was tried to be done wasn't the way that it should be. I mean, this is obviously, I feel this is important for the structure that we have in place. We adopt codes for a reason, and we follow them for a reason, and we don't allow either companies or AHJs or anybody else to just say, well, I think it means that, so that's what we're going to do. You can, and again, the municipality has the means to change it if they feel necessary, but that wasn't done. And it's really part of the original testimony. You can imagine how tough it might be in a small building. It might be tough, but in a place like a mall or a hospital or airport or something like that, where it could become almost impossible to do based on the legalities of working on equipment that's not part of a project. So it could be very tough. And I believe that even that situation, though, could be addressed by some kind of a local thing if that's what's necessary. if anybody has any questions, I don't, I don't know what more to say.
Mr. Field?
Yes, Paul. So what dog does Otis have in this fight? I mean, obviously it doesn't affect you at all. I mean, you go in, you do a building, you number it. So why is Otis out here defending this, or when maybe it's the building owners or whatever that should be doing this? Because I don't see that it affects you guys at all.
Well, it does affect us when it's on our inspection report and it's a requirement for our company to do. Yes, it does affect us. It ends up on our inspection report for that project, or has several times, and we can't walk away from that. And I can't go tell the owner they can't make me do this, but they can you. That's not the way. If I'm not responsible for it, yet they're trying to tell me I am, that's really the reason this started. And seriously, most of you are in construction. If you're putting an addition on the building, the legalities of your people or our people working in part of a building that isn't covered under the insurance for the project, it could have big issues. I believe that if the municipality feels strongly enough about this, that there's ways to get it done. But I don't believe that it should be on the elevator contractor.
Mr. Steele?
Follow up, if I might, Mr. Bender. So you do both projects, I assume, where you're hired directly by the owner to do a modernization or an elevator install. Some you work through a general contractor. Probably more the modernization would be one you'd be directly hired by the owner, correct?
Correct.
And so with the new work, you'd be working under a general. And so you were talking about you're left holding this. The scenario where you're working directly for the owner, does this come into play, the numbering, or has it in the past?
Yeah, I would say it has, but I don't think that it ever got into a situation where there was elevators that we weren't working on, so they would fall under that code. And
do you agree that, and I'm with you, I'm kind of from Missouri, you show me where it says this, but do you think of this negatively, of identifying all of the elevators? Do you think it's a bad thing to have them all identified?
No.
But you feel that it's not your responsibility, and therefore you don't want to pass it on to the owner?
No, I don't feel that it's not our responsibility. I know that it's not a requirement of the code.
Now, and I agree, the elevator code is a pretty daunting booklet.
Yeah.
Did you read Mr. Rain's summary where he makes reference
of
the
course.
2.9 back to Section 8?
Of course.
Do you have any comments on those specific references that he summarized? It's in his identification of elevators is the title. It's on Municipality of Anchorage letterhead. Mm-hmm. And in the first paragraph, there's reference about Section 2.29 and its applicability in both Chapter 8 as well as new work.
Yes, and I believe that was addressed in Mr. McCall's letter here.
It seems that he says in Mr. McCall in 1.13, application of parts, he does have an exception that identifies 8.1, 8.6, 8.7, 8.8, 8.9, 8.10, and 8.11, applying to both new and existing.
Where are you reading?
I believe I left out 5.10. So, Mr. McCall, isn't he saying that those other chapters do have?
Where in Mr. McCall's? First page, second page?
I'm reading, we respectively submit that Section 2291 of A17.1 has been interpreted incorrectly by the municipality. Sections 1.13 and 2.291 of A17-1 state the following. And under 1.13, it does list exceptions to new installations only, and those exceptions are Part 1, Part 5, 10, 8.1, 8.6, 8.7,
Yes,
blah, blah, blah.
yes, I agree. But again, if you read further,
Okay?
the second page, the second paragraph on the second page addresses that.
So the only thing that is spoken to here is 8.7. He hasn't spoken to 8.1, 8.6, 8.8, 8.9, 8.10, 8.11. Would you like to maybe
I don't believe
enlighten me?
229.1's referenced in any of those sections.
I'm just asking the opportunity for you to enlighten me why he just focused on 8.
Because the issue is 229.1, and I don't believe that's referenced in any of those other sections.
Well, I think we can maybe wait for Mr. Rand to get perspective. Maybe we can maybe follow up on this.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Bender? I have a couple here. If this was a new building with 2 or more elevators, would these elevators have to be identified with this numbering and identification that we're discussing today?
Say that again,
If it's a new building with 2 or more elevators, is this identification that we're discussing today required?
absolutely, because they are new installations.
If this is an existing building, let's say it has 2 elevators adjacent to each other, and they're being modernized, would the identification be required?
Yes, because they're part of a group.
Now, let's take a building, last time we talked about the Diamond Center quite a bit. If you were putting in a new elevator somewhere in the building, would it require identification? That
Yeah.
one elevator?
Yes. And can I expand on that a little bit?
Yes, sir.
In the case of the Diamond Center, of the H&M store that was installed there, but 2 escalators and an elevator in there, I believe that technically, if that part of that building, and it's owned by H&M, so it's the whole what defines a building comes into play there, and I'm not sure what it is, but I think if the ownership or the address or the fire separation of a building, if that project, that area was defined as a building, maybe not a freestanding alone building, but the definition of a building by the building code, then there's a possibility that you could have named that elevator 1 and had one down the hall in another building with the same number. I'm not sure that what constitutes a building. I think that's a little, something that has to be looked at a little more in projects like that, because I don't think it's a good idea to have 2 elevators in the same area or in a mall that have the same number. It would be a good idea to, get together and decide what we're going to call it, which actually we did there. That turned out to be elevator 7, but the owner went and numbered the rest of the elevators in there at the request of the municipality. Otis didn't do it, but it didn't turn out that we had 2 elevators in the same complex with the same number.
You did identify elevator 7 in this case with this signage.
Yes.
If you were walking into a building similar to that and did a modernization to elevator 7, would elevator 7 need to be identified if it had not been previous?
Yes.
So the next scenario would be if you were putting in a new elevator in a building. It has one, you're putting a second one in an adjacent hoistway area, side to side. How many elevators would you identify?
In that case, I would say both of them, because it would be, in that case, they wouldn't be separate elevators, they'd be part of a group, and that would apply.
Now, if those elevators were on different ends of the building,
Then technically, no. If we install a new elevator or elevators, then they fall under that guideline. And if you modernize groups of elevators that are hooked together, and keep in mind, that's the thing, the whole idea of identification in this code, regardless of what we think is a good idea for other cases of numbering elevators, is for emergency personnel. That is what this code mandates. That's what it's for. There's more than likely there is other good reasons to number elevators, but that's not what this code mandates. You'd mandate it yourself, and I would be totally agreeable to that.
so as I understand it, kind of drawing a conclusion to what you've told me so far, you're kind of limiting it to a group, to a limited area within a building.
Well, the elevator code basically defines groups of elevators that are under the same group control. If you have 3 elevators and you hit one button and they react that way, the controllers or the brains of the elevator are hooked together to be a group of elevators.
So that would work whether the 2 elevators are next to each other in a common lobby or opposed from each other in the common lobby.
They could be, yeah.
Since they're commonly controlled at that point.
More than likely, yes. You could always have them separate, and I don't know why you'd want to.
Understand that. So what I'm trying to do is find the lines here, because we spent an awful lot of time last time trying to define the lines. And I'm trying to help understand again the lines of.
I think the easiest way to do it is to keep in mind that it's for emergency personnel. If you've got an emergency and you've got old elevators or a group of elevators that have been modernized, and the fire department or elevator person goes into that room, and the other fireman on the radio saying, shut the power off to elevator 7, it needs to be marked. That's why this stuff was put in the code. But for you to call Aunt Martha and say, meet me by elevator 7, that's not, it might be a good idea to have them numbered that way, but that's not what this is about. This is about safety of elevators and the people that work on them and respond to emergencies.
So where I'm trying to come from is you think the municipality is incorrect in saying all elevators. For instance, let me use the Diamond Center and use store names here.
Mm-hmm.
You put in a new elevator 7 at the H&M, and as I understand it, the municipality has asked you to mark all elevators, including ones that are in the connecting corridor between the main mall and the tower, and I don't know if there's any farther into the mall.
Apparently there were 6 other ones, because this one turned out to be 7. So.
Okay. Another building we talked about was Providence. As to, granted, there's a number of buildings out at Providence. They have identifying addresses, and Lord knows, you got a rough idea how many elevators are in Providence.
Yeah, I don't know. Bunch.
Is it in the teens?
Oh, it's more than that, I think.
20s?
Jalen would know.
In your opinion, what would be a reasonable call then if you were doing an upgrade or a modernization to an elevator in a building?
Well, let's use Providence as an example, or the airport. Generally, institutions like that have their elevators numbered at least where the public sees them anyhow, because there's so many of them for their maintenance people, for their security and stuff like that. Generally, they're already numbered. And probably for good reason. But if we went in and modernized one and they didn't happen to be numbered, that's the point. This code, you can't go into this code and say that it has to be done the way this code is written. And again, I think the municipality does feel strongly that this needs to happen. Well, let's do that. Let's draft up a local amendment or something. But the problem is it's trying to be done not by legislative action or at the time of adoption or local amendment. That could happen tomorrow if you could agree on the wording. But what the code mandates for numbering of elevators, we comply with, and it is for elevator personnel and emergency personnel.
Mr. Fredin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, two questions, sir. On this letter that you handed out with the Otis, it's got the verbiage for 2.29. There's the categories there, A through I, noting what items need to be identified. I understand the logic that you're saying is that if you have to go to an elevator, to the elevator equipment room, to isolate that, and then the ones I've seen where there's multiple elevators, that you're considering that would be in a group and still need to be individually identified. Can you enlighten us on, are all of these items, A through I, always in this? I mean, some of these items look like they obviously have to be connected to the elevator. Are any of these items remote from that one elevator to where, let's say in this assembly chambers, if one elevator was over there and the other one was over there, to where it said, hey, we need to cut the power to that one or do something to this one over here, are any of these items going to be somewhere else other than at those two elevator machine rooms?
Well, that's interesting because it depends if they're new or old.
Hallway or something.
It depends if they're new or old. Nowadays, the technology, the machine rooms are gone. We don't have machine rooms anymore. The elevator, all the controllers in the wall, the machines in the hoistway.
Point of order, please.
Who called? Jalen?
Do I have permission to speak?
Yes, sir.
It depends on what elevator manufacturer and what model you're talking about. There are many, many models of elevators out there. The particular model Paul is talking about happens to be their own most commonly installed model right now, but there are many, many elevator companies and many models of elevators with machine rooms, machine spaces, control rooms, and control spaces in a variety of locations. And all of the equipment in A through whatever it was
I was just
are in a variety of locations.
I think you'll get there.
I was just trying to give a little insight to it. I wasn't speaking to just ours, and there's manufacturers that aren't in Alaska that have different things, but the thing that comes to mind that would be away from the elevator is the signs that are required on the jams at the main floor. So those are obviously a long ways away from the machine. An MG set, that's a motor generator set. New elevators don't have them. They don't make them anymore. When you modernize an elevator, we throw them away. So those may or may not be there. Those things at the top of the elevator, there's always a top of the elevator, so that would be marked, and that's remote from the room. That's where, in a case of emergency personnel, if the firemen happen to bust the door down and see the number on top of the elevator, they can relay that number to the people in the room, or certainly they can when they're in the lobby. If you're in the machine room, if there is one, the marking of some of the other stuff is really it falls a little bit away from the emergency personnel. It's more based towards elevator personnel, so that they don't shut elevator 6 off and go over and start trying to work on the generator on number 5. So it's there's good reasons for both. But
If I may help clarify the question, no, that you're asking is, but you can have especially with the hydraulic or roped hydraulic, you can have a remote machine room that can be some distance from the hoistway.
You could. And on a hydraulic elevator, there's many of those that are.
You were asking?
Yes, and
That's what I was-
one of the other items you had mentioned was that a firefighter going into a mechanical room could get disoriented on where exactly the elevator is that they are looking for. That's what I was getting at, was is there a possibility of an emergency responder getting disoriented about which elevator? If they're in a group, it seems to be everything's in that room, but if they're like the H&M one,
Well, and
disoriented would be kind of difficult, and shutting off one across the building.
yeah, most of the time when if they're in a room, that's why they're numbered, because there's a group and you could get confused. But you were asking about identification remotely, and there would be in a case of on the door jam or on top of the elevator or something, but perhaps for different reasons.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had is, Mr. Burnett, in his email back to you, had a sentence he has in here. He says, I realize that the installer of the new elevators may not have the legal authority to do any work on the existing elevators in question. And I'm mechanical. I'm not an elevator guy. Can you enlighten me on how completing the, because as you mentioned, whether or not this becomes a policy and what the code currently says, if they do go forward with the policy, you said there's ways around that. Can you, I'm concerned that by this statement, why couldn't the numbering system be added by Otis or another person to somebody else's elevator? They talk about the liability of of putting numbers on another person's equipment and how that might create issues.
Well, West High School, for example, we installed a new elevator in there, and there was a number of other elevators in the existing school that are maintained by a different company. And most elevator companies have clauses in their maintenance contract that you can't hire somebody else to perform work on it for good reason. So you don't want to have your, elevators are pretty dangerous things, really. I mean, we go through a lot of training. You can't just, pick up a card and go start working on. But but putting numbers on them, I don't believe would be dangerous. But falls into the same kind of theory, I think. But the main thing is that insurance-wise, for that project where that was with Cornerstone, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how insurance works or whatever, but we present insurance for this project, and then somebody's trying to tell us, okay, you go down to the rest of the building and do something, and there's already been suggestions in Sharon's letter and stuff of how to accomplish that and not burden the elevator contractor with it. So I think, again, I'm not opposed to it, and I think there's been some good suggestions of how to accomplish it, but it would need to be done up front in plan review and stuff. But the legalities and the insurance-wise of working on equipment that you're not under contract to do is I know is a concern for our company, and I would imagine other elevator companies as well as general contractors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Did it again.
Straight.
Mr. Straight, I'm sorry.
I've been called worse, it's all right. Through the chair, a question for you, sir. Are there any other scenarios where you're working on a elevator at a facility and there's other existing elevators in the facility where some code provision or something drives you to, requires additional work on the other elevators that are outside your scope? Or is this the sole exception that we're talking about?
I can't imagine where we'd be performing work that was outside of our scope. I mean, if it wasn't in our scope, we're not legally allowed to perform work on our safety policies and our insurance and everything would not allow that. If work on one elevator required interacting with the other elevator, then it'd be part of the scope.
I guess to clarify my question, it goes beyond just the scope. Usually, well, in a project you have your scope is pretty concise, but the case we're looking at, due to regulatory requirements from the MOA, you're being given additional scope. So are there other situations from regulatory, from the inspectors? And I'll ask the same question, or you could speak to it when you do your testimony, but are there other situations where something requires the other elevators to be updated? Or again, is this the only situation? I mean, if there's seismic issues, the other elevators are outdated or anything like that, or are we on kind of a one case here?
There are requirements that if you're going to perform work on an elevator that's part of a group or something, that you would have to do the same thing to the other one. You couldn't take one elevator and bring the fire service of it up to code and leave the one across or the one next to it not. And most generally, it would be because it was part of a group definition. I don't. Maybe Taylor might think of an example, but I can't really think of any that would be where we'd have to go perform work on something that wasn't in the scope. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Bender? Mr. Steele?
One last question, Mr. Bender.
Certainly.
If you agree if you were working on a pair or a group that you would be a new elevator, you'd be required to put this numbering system on. How would you go about, if there were 7 other elevators in the building, how would you go about establishing your numbering system?
That's not defined. I think it would be a consensus between the owner.
So you could make your elevator number 1, and there could be a number 1 over there. And by code, you'd be right, is what I'm hearing.
Like I said earlier, technically, in the case of the mall, you could. I wouldn't do that. I don't know of anybody that would, but that would require interaction with the AHJ and the building owner to make sure that we don't have
I'm trying to get into scope here. It's your scope to number the system. How would you go about numbering that system knowing there are 6 other elevators that you have nothing to do with?
Me, myself, I would find out what the other elevators were, get a consensus, decide to call them X and Y, get a consensus with the AHJ and do that.
So the decision would be between the municipality and you and the owner? Or?
Yes. I mean, I would like to think we'd involve the owner because we don't want to call it something he doesn't like. There's new elevators that are defined by alphabetical and not numerical, so there's it doesn't have to be a number.
Thank you.
Mr. McGee?
In 2.2.91, it does specify in buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a unique alphabetical or numerical identification. So by that wording, you wouldn't be able to duplicate that number.
Other questions for Mr. Bender? Hearing none, thank you. And I'll let the municipality have an opportunity to make their presentation.
Right,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to first focus on the context of this interpretation. Again, this is an appeal of an interpretation made by the building official. So I would like to read a short paragraph from the Administrative Code, 2310-103.3, Powers and Duties of the Building Official. In general, the building official is authorized and directed to enforce the provisions of this code, to render interpretations of this code, and to adopt policies and procedures in order to clarify the application of its provisions. Such interpretations, policies, and procedures shall be in compliance with the intent and purpose of this code and shall not have the effect of waiving requirements specifically provided for in this code. And that is precisely what occurred in this case, making an interpretation of the code. Then I'd like to direct your attention to the page 1 of 9 of the appeal, or it's the first page after the appeal form, and it's the email that generated the issue in the first place. And Mr. Bender was copied on an email. Well, it was addressed to Mr. Bender to clarify the interpretation that came up with the West High School. And I'd like to give you a little context of what was going on there. There was a new elevator being put in at West. The question of labeling came up. The inspection said the other elevators haven't been labeled. This needs to be taken care of before we can sign off this project. So we are working with the school district. The owner of the building said, guys, we need to get the other elevators labeled. Mr. Bender's company was not inclined to address other elevators other than the one they were installing, which is fine. Our conversation is with the owner, who's ultimately responsible for completion of the building permit. Now, contractors may pull a building permit, but the owner of the property is ultimately responsible for that work being done, or for that permit being fulfilled. So working with Randy Ribble of the school district, Randy said he was willing. He said, look, I'll have our other maintenance guys or our other maintenance companies, I'll commit to this date certain to have the other ones labeled. We said, okay. In that, with that commitment, we'll, on this basis, sign off the conditional certificate of occupancy and let you go ahead. But it brought up that this was the second time this has came up. The last time was on the Diamond Center. So that was the reason to, in the email, confirm the interpretation that installation of a new elevator does trigger labeling for all elevators in the building. And Chandler will speak to the technicalities of how we get to that interpretation, and I support that interpretation in a moment. But note what that I said. From here forward, this interpretation will be rigorously noted at plan review, and all design teams will be expected to alert owners and contractors that labeling must be coordinated as part of the project, whether it is done by the new elevator installer or in concert with other elevator maintenance companies that may have maintenance contracts for previously installed elevators. Further reminder that we will be having, that we have been conversing in Department of Labor since this was written, but we do closely coordinate with the Department of Labor, who defers inspection of elevators to us, or the installation of elevators to us, and remind we are tasked with being as least as strict as the state is in interpretations, but we always have the ability to be of a higher standard than the state is. But the point I want to make with this is that there has never been, with this interpretation, there is no requirement for the elevator company doing the new installation or the work that's triggering the labeling to be done by them. There's no requirement or expectation, as you can see in this interpretation, of that to be done by the particular elevator company under the permit. The interpretation is that it triggers the need for the other labeling as a condition of closing out the permit, and that's the owner's responsibility. They may want to, the design team may want to make a note in the drawings that contractors be advised, you will be asked to label the other elevators, or they may, contractors may want to have a conversation with the owner, hey, by the way, here's our base bid. If you want us to label your other elevators, here's the cost to do that. We are not imposing that requirement on the contractor. The requirement's on the owner. If you're doing this change to your building, our interpretation is you need to bring your other labeling into conformance. But we are not, I emphasize not, putting that responsibility on the particular elevator company working on a particular elevator that's triggering the situation. So be in mind, that's the interpretation that's being appealed. I want to make clear that that's what the interpretation was. So with that.
So I have a question for Sharon, if I may.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So Sharon, can we assume that there's a ton of elevators out there that are just unnumbered, and is that what, in that situation, did you have two unnumbered elevators and the new one going in
I'll let Challen speak to that, and if we could stay in order, it's the municipality's time to do their presentation, so.
Got it.
If I could ask you to hold your questions till Challen does his presentation, and then we'll address them all
I
together.
would-
He may answer some of those as he goes.
I would like the chance.
And we
Mr.
did not
Chairman.
interrupt Mr. Bender.
Mr. Chairman?
We'll give you an opportunity at the end to rebuttal, if you would please, to kind of keep things moving in order.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Challen, who will present the technicalities of how we get to this interpretation.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Was it appropriate for her then to make that statement?
I want to make the same
And
statement.
if not, can I have the opportunity to respond to that? Should she, was it appropriate for her to make that statement at that time?
Which statement?
She just said, if we're following protocol and it was going to be the witness's chance,
If anything, it was my fault to let Mr. Field to interrupt the municipality's presentation. You had your opportunity to present, this is their opportunity to present, and then the board asked questions, and then we'll each have turns.
statement just now was not a part of the presentation, or was it, and was it appropriate?
Mr. Chair,
I don't know.
staff presentation is not, does not specifically say how many people are part of the staff presentation. We have a presentation that's composed of my introduction and Challen's refinement. So, okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Jalen. Mr. Rang.
Okay, hello. My name is Challen Ryan. I'm one of the city elevator inspectors and the one who's been most involved with this. I'm the one that drafted the letter that I'll refer to first. If you can all turn to that, it's in your packet from us that Tana sent you this week. And the letter is called Identification of Elevators. It's in bold at the top center. So just to kind of give you some background on identifying elevators. Excuse me, the elevator code's been around since 1921, and there's a lot of additions. Our most recent edition that's published is the 2013 book. Way into the publications, they decided that numbering of elevators on certain parts of the elevator should be a requirement. And ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, they publish our code book. They decided to start requiring some numbering. And the NEC, National Electrical Code, NFPA 70 code book, also had requirements for numbering certain components related to elevators. Way back in time, it used to be for just multiple elevators and a hoistway, and a hoistway is the shaft that they move up and down in, or multiple elevators that had equipment in a shared machine room. And later on, there were code additions that decided to expand that and not just number elevators that shared a common hoistway or machine room, but all elevators in a building needed certain numbering. Early on, they only had a few things numbered. Kind of interesting. Sometimes just the main three-phase power disconnecting means that turns off power to the elevator in the machine rooms. And another one or two items like the machine itself or an overspeed governor for that particular elevator. It's hard to tell which one it's for. So they would just have you number a few things with A, B, and C, or elevators 1, 2, and 3. And then as they expanded that, they decided to start numbering the car operating panels. And when you stand in an elevator and you face the button panel, that's called a car operating panel. They wanted that numbered. And then they started wanting the car top numbered. So when elevator personnel are working on top of an elevator and you have another 2 elevators in the building or another 60 elevators in the building, you'd know which elevator you're on top of. And if you communicate with somebody up in a machine room somewhere or a control room, whatever it is, then you could communicate, hey, I need you to turn off this particular circuit on car number 67, or I need you to do this on the governor for car number 8, or whatever. Then ASME continued to expand that. Then they wanted the main elevator entrance frame that you walk through numbered at the main landing only, the main lobby of the building. That's pretty new. That's only been around a few years now where we had to number the main jams. You'll see that right outside here on these new elevators. So they keep expanding numbering. And they also, in the most recent edition of the code book that the state and the city have, the 2010, they expanded it not just to new elevators, they expanded identifying elevators to 8.7 in the code book, which is the alteration section. That's not new construction, that's alterations is 8.7. So several locations in 8.7, as I indicated in my letter, reference you back to 2.29. And 2.29, as you're aware, is the series of things you number, the series of things you identify. So now, not just for new construction, but when we modernize, and there's a variety of modernization type projects that require identifying all of these devices on an elevator, whether it's being modernized or not. Because when you do these modernization projects, and then they refer you to 2.29, 2.29 immediately expands itself. Like Preston read, it indicates that each elevator in the building shall be provided with a unique alphabetical or numerical identification number, and the following items will be written on, and then you have a lot of pictures of those. So I agree with Paul 100%. It is for emergency personnel. Oftentimes, elevator personnel are emergency personnel. They respond to entrapments. So does the fire department. When people are trapped in elevators, both respond. Typically, whoever's gotten a hold of first shows up. And one of the first things that needs to happen is you need to kill power to that elevator. And now we have all these different types of elevators, some with machine rooms, some with machine spaces, some with control rooms, some with control spaces, some with all of these devices in the hoistway, some with these devices in the hoistway and a control room and a machine room down the hall. It gets pretty confusing pretty quick. And as you turn around in a building, and especially under pressure, doing the right thing on the right elevator could have, or doing the wrong thing on the wrong elevator could have drastic consequences to yourself or the riding public or whoever is underneath it on top of it working on it. So the identification is for safety of people working on it and people responding to emergencies, elevator and fire department. So further in this letter, I made it pretty clear that we don't just apply this to existing elevators. Yes, it would be nice to go number all existing elevators, but we don't do that. The only time we apply numbering is when new elevators are built in a building and there's multiple elevators. And the new code says number them all the elevators in the building. And we have that done. We're never a part of deciding what the number is. That's always the owner and the elevator contractor. It's either going to be ABC 1, 2, 3 or something like that. Sometimes they have great big long numbers like EB04 or EB07, but it's up to them, whatever they want. So new construction, they're numbered. Then the code book, if you do several types of modernizations in 8.7, refers you directly to 2.29, which again says number them all in the building. So only during those types of projects do we apply this. We never just go out to an existing elevator and say number it because you have 10 in the building. When we do our periodic inspections of existing equipment, and a lot of you are aware we walk around and we do that. There's 1,400 elevators in Anchorage, and we walk around and do periodic inspections every couple of years on all equipment. And we never just go up and say, hey, number your equipment because it's a good idea. Another book where this similar type of requirement is present is the NFPA 70, the NEC, National Electrical Code. When there's a new service put on a building, electricians need to not just number the new service, but if there's other existing services that serve parts of that building, they're required to post signs on the new and existing services indicating what they serve and where the other services are and things like that. So it's a similar type of code requirement that's retroactive to other equipment around the corner. And I'd have to ask somebody else. I don't know who does that numbering, if it's the electrical contractor who's doing the new work. Like with us, the elevator company doesn't need to do the numbering. We believe the code requires that the numbering be done, but not necessarily that the elevator company do it, just that somebody do it. Typically, all the other elevator contractors do it. Right now, Otis is the only one who doesn't. So it doesn't matter who does it. We just believe that the code requires that it be done. If the A17-1 Elevator Code Committee on the national level intends something different about this code, then I believe they should write it differently, because it says what it says. And we've gotten with the state, and we all agree, the state and us. We never started enforcing this till we were in 100% agreement with the state elevator inspection department. And there's 5 of us. And then we all move forward in the same way, agreeing in the same way when numbering should be provided. And so we do it the same way the state does. It's required during the same types of projects, whether you're out in the state or in the municipality of Anchorage. So I wanted to bring up that similarity to the NEC, where if you have a new service, you have to go label the other ones. It's for safety. It's to know, what services are on what part of the building, what they serve, where the other services are. It's kind of like that. It's an equivalent amount of safety. West High School, where a new elevator was added, the other existing elevators in the building, one of them has a remote machine room. It's in the basement of the building. It was kind of shoehorned in there back in the 80s. When you go to it, which elevator of the 3 is it for? All of the equipment in there, you have no idea. All of a sudden now there's multiple elevators. Which elevator is that one for? You go to that elevator and there's a problem with it. And which machine room is its equipment in? It can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. So the other part of this, if we were to go ahead and number the way that Paul has appealed, if we put a new elevator in an existing building and we number it, let's say elevator number 5, I can't imagine ASME would have that be the intent of the code, and we don't number any of the other elevators in the building. What's the point of numbering that new one? To all of us at the state and the city level of elevator inspection, there would be no point in that. It didn't make sense to us, and especially with the code written the way it is written. And I'll read that again. In buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a unique alphabetical or numerical identification, and it has sizing and where to place these numbers. So it made sense to us to, only during certain projects, to require the numbering on these devices. So the state still interprets it this way. We still interpret it this way. Other jurisdictions interpret this way. I don't know of. I'd have to speak with a lot of different people to find out how many jurisdictions interpret it this way, but these are newer codes. The code has changed regarding numbering, and this is what it says today, and that's how we've interpreted it to enforce it that way. And the other elevator contractors agree too. They do this. They look at the requirement and don't question it. So I think if you have any questions, you can ask me. I think that's it.
Questions for Mr. Rain?
Yeah, I just have a question under, so
Field?
under section 2.9, identification, 2.29.1, it's what you just read. Is that under new elevators? Is that code intended for new elevators?
Yes, it's in the new construction part of the code book, part 2. That's what the 2 indicates, yeah, for new elevators. Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Mr. Ryan? Mr. Straight?
So same question I asked earlier, but is there any other code provisions, regulatory requirements that would require you to, for modernizing or working on one elevator, have some effect on other elevators outside the fairly new scope of a construction project, or is this unique?
This is unique. That's why I brought up that National Electrical Code, one where they put in a new electrical service, but then they have to go label the existing ones, because that's the only other time I know of anything like that. I don't know of any other kinds of projects that would require you to go start doing things on other elevators. Mm-hmm.
Chair, I have another question.
Mr. Field?
Yeah. So since this 2.29 is for new elevators, and when it says in buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a unique alphabetical or numerical identification. So your interpretation is that means whether it's a new, even though this is under new elevators or new construction, that means that that this isn't talking about more than one new elevator. It means if there's existing elevators, then they need to be numbered, even though this is under the new construction code.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like 2.29 immediately expands the scope to cover if there's any other elevators in the building. On top of your new construction project, on top of shoehorning a new elevator into an existing building and looking at just that new elevator, it immediately expands itself. And you'll see that in Bryce's email as well that I included in my packet. Bryce meaning one of the state elevator inspectors. So, yeah. And then, of course, 8.7, the alteration section of the code book, which is not new construction, for a variety of types of modernization projects, refers you back to 2.29. That's newer that ASME has done that. Said, hey, when you modernize, please number the existing equipment down the hall as well. Interesting they've made that reference, but that's newer in the code book.
So you didn't talk too much about Bryce Burnett's comments here from the state, but basically what I'm reading here is he is under this same code and interpreting it the same way that all means all.
Yes.
And just another question here is we use the term alteration and we use the term modernization. Is there a difference between the two?
We have an upcoming local amendment that defines the two, so it's clear to everybody. That local amendment will be effective April 1st. And so in the code book, 8.7 is, it's defined as, or it's labeled as alterations, okay? In the industry, we have a slang term, and that slang term is modernization. That word used to be in the code book in the equivalent of 8.7. That word actually used to be in the code book. Trouble was it wasn't defined in definitions. So a modernization to an elevator is something greater than a minor alteration. A minor alteration is something like a new door operator, a new door edge that reopens the door, maybe adding a phone to a cab that never had a phone before, adding a seismic device to an old elevator. There's a variety of alterations that are covered in 8.7. The various types of modernization projects are also covered in 8.7. Those are right in the beginning of my letter.
So
they're major alteration projects is what they are. They're a change in type of motion control, a change in type of operation control, or changing controllers in their entirety, like a complete change out.
But 8.7 addresses both alterations and modernizations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
But only a few types of alterations require this numbering. Little basic alterations to existing elevators don't make you go and label anything. But when you do a major modernization to the tune of, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, these major modernization projects, that's when ASME asks for the labeling to be done. Only for a few major types of projects do they ask for the numbering to be done.
we talked about this at the three-member panel. For instance, Providence, our little hospital with its own urban sprawl.
Yes.
Now, if we go all means all, that's basically all buildings connected together. Is that?
Yeah, and so here's how, because things get gray, and because you do have some unique situations like Providence Hospital, here's how we've interpreted that. Providence went through some major modernization projects a few years back in South Tower Building D. So, yes, the main campus has one address, and there's a few other auxiliary addresses on their kind of outlying buildings. But the fire department, the elevator service contractors, all employees in those buildings, all personnel associated with those buildings that do surgeries, that do emergency response, that do maintenance in those buildings, they all very well know the difference between building B, building H, building G, A, B, C, F, and so on. They know the difference. And you've got the self-closing 2-hour fire doors between each one of those towers. So when they modernized Building D South Tower and Building D North Tower, some numbering was done by that particular elevator company. They just did numbering that was required by the code at that time. And we allowed the numbering to stay right within Building D. They didn't go number anything in Building F, G, H. Everybody knows the difference between all the towers there. And it only seemed reasonable not to have them go number everything else. The fire department has different fire service keys for all the different elevators in each tower there. Everyone knows the difference. And like I said, the buildings are separated by all the 2-hour fire doors as well. And the buildings are labeled A, B, C, D. And it only seemed reasonable to allow them to just number all the elevators that they were associated with in Building D. So that was kind of a call by us, good, bad, or indifferent. That's the call we made. Maybe it was too lenient. I don't know. That's the call we made.
Now, we've talked a few times about the Diamond Center as an example, and I believe this is kind of stemming from that. Was it the municipality's position to do all of Diamond Center or just the tower addition and not the...
Well, Diamond Center has one address, one owner. And when the new, I'd like to point this out too, each new elevator that's added to an existing building that you all have installed, Paul, has been labeled from the factory elevator number 1, and there's already another elevator 1 down the hall. Every time. So that's something that we couldn't have either. That's pretty misleading to the folks who need to respond to emergencies. So at Diamond Center, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd like to add to that. In that case, we did the same situation with the building owner. We told the building owner that the occupancy for the area of the building permit was not going to be granted until the owner arranged for the other elevators to be labeled. We did not require that to be done by the elevator company installing the elevator. We just, in the H&N store, we required that it be done and coordinate with the owner, ultimately responsible for the fulfillment of the building permit, to label the other elevators.
Yeah, and the owner just put actually the other elevators already had labels all over the machine room equipment. So the owner just added a few numbers to the car operating panels in their existing cabs and on the main jams that you walk through, just at the main landing only. So they added a few numbers, and that's it.
The intent was to do the whole Diamond Center then?
Yes, one address, and that's what was noted, yeah.
And to just make sure it's perfectly clear, from what I understood there, Ms. Walsh, it's not the building department's position to hold the general contractor and his elevator supplier hostage on his closing out his permit for this numbering? Or how is this working? Can you please clarify?
The conditional certificate of occupancy, or the certificate of occupancy if they're ready for a final, is not issued until that labeling is done. We do not require that it be done by the elevator company, but that it be done. So if the owner wants to arrange with, maybe has a different company doing the maintenance work on the other elevators. So if he calls his maintenance company and says, we're numbering our elevators, we need you to come over and take care of it. That's perfectly acceptable.
So they can't get a conditional either?
Correct.
Other questions for the
Wait,
minister?
hold on. I'm being corrected myself.
Yeah, no, they've been given CCOs, conditional certificates of occupancy, yeah. It's an item that ends up staying on the report until it's finished, but yeah, it hasn't held up a CCO.
Okay, I'm apologize. I'm thinking of the West High School one, which they couldn't occupy that space. We did not allow them to occupy that space until we had the commitment from the owner to do the labeling. It was the commitment that we were looking for. And I believe it was 30 days. They did it within 30 days. thank you for correcting me.
Other questions for the municipality?
Yes, I've got a question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Feller?
Mr. Rain, you made a statement that other jurisdictions have interpreted this the same way that MOA has. Can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, you said you didn't know how many, but is this something that you guys actually researched, or just, can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, there's only a few people I've asked, so I haven't started any kind of an email chain to any other jurisdictions or anything like that. There's a 1,000 things we look at, and I haven't sent out an email to very many people. Years ago, when we decided this with the state at the same time, how to interpret this and how to enforce this, I asked a couple of inspectors elsewhere, because we were working with the state inspectors and us at the city level, and asked others as well. But I've never sent out any kind of mass email, which would be a good idea at this point. It'd be interesting. But anyway, we just made the interpretation with the state inspectors and then started to enforce it and let all the elevator companies know how we were going to enforce it.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Mr. Field?
How long have you been enforcing this interpretation?
I want to say about 5 years. Because remember, before that, the elevator code just wanted identification of equipment when elevators shared a common hoistway or a common machine room.
Okay.
And then it was added to the code to go ahead and start numbering when you had multiple elevators in a building. So it's probably about that 5 years, maybe a little more.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ferdine, did you have a question for the municipality?
Yes, sir. Through the chair, Mr. Rain, you had mentioned that the state inspector, Mr. Burnett, we have a letter in here in our packet from June 30th that is pretty cut and dry, that backs up exactly what you said regarding this is the way the state is interpreting it. And then in our packet, we have another letter from Mr. Burnett dated December 9th after his original reply saying this is the way it is. And this other letter after the June 30th sounds like he's reconsidered his position on that interpretation at the state level.
No, I think I'd have to, I think we'd have to, reread it right now to find out, but I think if it's fully read, what you'll find is that they still interpret it the same way and they enforce it the same way, but what they do is they write a separate report to the owner to get it done. So they require it be done. They don't require the elevator company to do it, but they still require that it be done. They just use a separate piece of paper and give it to the owner to let the owner know that, hey, this isn't done. It was supposed to be done. It's something that needs to be done. Anybody can do it. But I think that's what that, if I'm thinking about the same email that you're referring to anyway, I think that's what he says.
The new letter does heavily talk about the permit, what they would have done with the
With the permit, yes, that's procedural. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So they still require it be done. It's just they have a little procedural part in there that he talked about.
Okay, thank you. And then to the staff there, what other communication, aside from flagging stuff at the permit review level, what other ways of communication has this been sent out to the design teams and the contractors beyond the elevator codes, just so, we used to get policies almost like seemed like a monthly basis sometimes back earlier. But I'm just as a mechanical engineer, I always kind of hate getting review comments that I didn't know about when I'm trying to rush through a permit. And I'm just kind of wondering if there's other communication that's been sent out to the design groups.
On this particular one, have we done a mass email on our blast list? No, we haven't. Our intent is to hit it when the application first comes in. It's a very simple item to fulfill. The point is, and we're unique, our elevator inspectors are unique in that they do the plan review as well, the elevators. So they make the comment, they've been making the comment for many years,
Yeah.
And the situation seems to have been that many companies, fine, they plan on it. Some companies either don't see the comment, ignore the comment, don't feel that it's, requirement, a real requirement, and then we get to CO time and it's a problem. When it's actually, our intent is to, we can certainly follow up with a blast email, but, we can certainly do that. We have a big book of policies, and publishing a policy for what really is an interpretation, it doesn't seem to be warranted in this case.
Could you please paraphrase the comment that you're referring to that gets done at plan review?
Yeah. So what I do when I do a plan review, if I see that it's a modernization project, one of the three that ASME wants numbering done, in a plan, as I'm issuing the permit, I do a little plan review reminders document for unique things about that project. And I'll say, this building also includes elevators that are not part of the modernization project per 8.7, whatever the section is, and it's referenced to 2.29. Please have identifying numbers placed on, and then I'd say the following items. I just referenced the code sections in my plan review. It's just a one-sentence item. And that way, up front of the project, many months before I'm called in for the acceptance inspection, then it's known. In case it was forgotten by somebody, it's a reminder. If it's a new construction project, like Lusac Library here says, there's 2 elevators being added to an existing building that have 5 existing elevators. As part of that, please ensure they're all identified with a unique alphabetical or numerical character on these items, and per 2.29, please make sure all identification is completed. Something like that in a little plan review reminders list.
It might be helpful to also clarify what is the standard for identification. What different types of identifying marks do you accept?
Different types?
Correct.
Like letters or numbers, like that? Or?
I'm talking about format.
Oh.
Do they have to be stainless steel?
Oh, no, they can be very inexpensive, they can be expensive, they can be very aesthetic or very plain. In all the machine rooms, control rooms, machine spaces, and control spaces, typically they're either a sprayed-on stencil or what most of the elevator mechanics use is a very thick marker. It's fine, it just needs to be permanent, and it's permanent until it's not. And it's suitable for the environment so it doesn't come off quickly with hydraulic fluid or something. The only 2 that are visible to the riding public would be in the car and on the main jam, and those are newer in the code. Those 2 are typically made a little more aesthetic and are about $5. The ones in the machine room are typically just a sprayed stencil really quick or a marker. So, and then the code, as you can see, specifies size. It wants very specific sizes for each one of these numbers. Main jams, 3 inches. Car tops, main power disconnects, 2 inches. COP inside the car, 1/2 inch characters. So they've gotten that specific. Interesting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've had enough time to really read and digest this letter from Otis dated February 16th that was handed out here. Have you had a chance to look at that, and do you offer any comment regarding your opinion to this writing?
No, our opinion stands the way that I originally wrote it. Obviously we don't agree. And if ASME's intent is different than what they wrote, then an interpretation could always be asked for from ASME. I mean, they always receive interpretation requests and then respond to them. So we've looked at it with the state and moved forward and enforce it the way it's written. And if ASME is really unhappy with how they've written it, I think they should rewrite it. Because if they meant something different, boy, they wrote it pretty specifically. And it seems to me that the way they wrote it isn't gray. So if they really meant something different, they should change the code language, because as written, it seems very clear and seems like it would be the law. So obviously we disagree, David McCall and the state and myself.
Mr. Loken.
Through the chair, so inspectors in the elevator department at MOA, they're also plan reviewers as well for the elevators?
Yes.
Okay. The comments that you make in plan review, do you make those formally redline on the permitted set, or is that just a comment to the design team?
It's stamped on the permitted set in the
It-
building file, in the elevator company's file, and in the elevator sections file. We have 3 different files, okay? And when I stamp it approved, what we write is approved to issue elevator permit and our name and date. And then if there's a little reminders document included with the drawings, we will say approved to issue elevator permit per the plan review reminders document, or, per the plan review attachment document, okay? And you can read that right on our red stamp on the, in the building file, their company file, and in our file in the elevator sections office. Yeah.
Okay, and 2010 code, when was that adopted?
The state adopted it, I want to say October 12th, 2012. And we have an MOU with the state where we have to enforce what they enforce and not be less stringent than the state.
So October 2012?
I believe so.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Hearing none, I would like to take a short break and stretch our minds, stretch our legs, and I can't quite see that one. So we go 7 minutes, that's quarter after. Does that sound fine? And then we can offer Mr. Bender a rebuttal and conclude. So we'll stand in recess.
So what's the so, and they tapped it.
I think I wanted to put 200 amp. Does it say in there? I want to do it. Show me what code that applies.
And then the SCR cable going through the back of the gutter, below the switches.
I don't like
out to 4 panels. Also, to 200 amp panels and sub-bed out.
No, they're
So, going to buy a big generator.
yes, sir.
But I can't tie in to specific loads and do load shedding device. Sheet rock. No crawl space. No attic access. Pretty much. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a load shedding device on one. So the load shedding device monitors the current from the generator. So the one panel will operate as heat. The lights the other panel takes care of all this upstairs. Yeah, 2 transfer switches, load shed device for one, controlled by the other. Monitoring the output. But part of it is there's not room. Well, there is. I figured it out. I did. I'm going to put a 6x6 gutter above the 2 disconnects, which is the right, the CT cable, and go across the top. Underneath the window, I've only got this much space, about 8 inches of space. And take it over the top of the 2 ATS. Only place I have to go like 40 inches of space between the window And then, our full-size tabs. And one of those will have a load sharing device on that. And then out of the bottom of those, out of APSs, I still have to feed loads. So, and it's got holes for protection. And so all these holes are there, and they're filled with this rock that's about this big now. It's crushed rock. Yeah, it's like this big, right? So there's no difference.
How's Jason doing?
Best
He's ornery as ever.
GRC,
That's good.
with some torpedoes.
Usually it's good.
Because I got.
Not to you, but not. You still have a wolf with him all the time? You still have a wolf dog with him all the time?
Yeah,
That's a big dog.
existing gutter.
Yeah. Cody.
Is it Cody?
Before the splice it. 12 by 12 in the gutter. I have room
You ever see his elephant tusk? You ever see his elephant tusk?
No, this time, he didn't have to.
Yeah, he's,
You know, I didn't want to bring one.
not long ago, about 10 years ago, he went to Africa and got an elephant. I don't know if he had the whole head on it. I don't think so. Well, that's freaking elephant, you know, I would have no inkling to want to go shoot one of them.
But they're not traveling down the gutter. They'll be coming, they're coming out of the back of the gutter, and then they'll be going straight down. So there won't be any.
It's less than 18 inches or something? Well, we take what I ran into.
I'll give you a drawing, just let you look.
So that what I ran into is, there's a type of service we can use out in the back is for small commercial, that's kind of what we're doing, where you have, but it, they come, so, and also, they downsize the room on residential. That's what it is. So, residential, which size SCR cable?
4 eyes.
For copper plumbing? Okay. Then that's for 200 by 800. That's okay. Because I think they can use 3 of aluminum by the regular table. They might, because it's like one down.
The other option I would have, I could downsize the fuses to 150s.
No, I don't
Because
think you need to.
because my loads are,
You know what, I don't think you need to. I remember I was getting confused with derating is what if they use SCR for the residential.
I hate with a passion. I would prefer the white onion, hands down.
That derating really works with a single feed. Right. As soon as you start, you can't use that for iron amp. You can't use that for 3 of them.
This is my second meeting today. Yeah.
It is.
Like, except it was a smaller board. Usually on site.
When they do those
Water, or wastewater.
the gutter underneath is
Technical
6
review.
hours. And so I've got the deflections, only requires 4 inches.
Yeah, I had trouble with that on the first when I had better ones too. But
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't like that. How did that go? I never got a chance to ask Sharon. We've all been thinking.
Yeah, you better do that.
Lights and stuff like that. But, yeah, visually. No, I mean, all.
Dave Hall.
All. Actually, it's supposed to be.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we had one.
Oh, she's like 2 or 3.
Oh, really?
I think this is the second one.
Oh, yeah, I, what the hell? They did a,
Huh.
she was real quiet, real
Oh, She's in there with Sarah, the small, dark.
That's the thing, NPR. And there's a different procedure for each type of actor. Your business. The appeals and action, and it's clearly stated. And then this one doesn't really speak to it.
Really? Oh, yeah.
On this case, after the form, or discuss request, there really isn't a place for it.
Tana, you want to start the machine, please?
And, yeah, so that doesn't really say. This is the kind of.
Your kids.
My wife is out of town with my youngest. They went down to Seattle for spring break. He and I were supposed to go to college to jump during spring break. Just me and him.
Ready? Call the meeting back to order. I wanted to give Mr. Bender an opportunity to rebut anything that the municipality may have presented. Mr. Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, two clarifications I would like to make. One, Mr. Ryan stated that the item presented from Mr. McCall that the municipality and the state don't agree with it. The state hasn't been given this document, so to speak, to that they don't agree with it is, I don't believe we're representing the state.
So
They have not been presented this document. And the second thing I'd like to clarify too is Mr. Ryan made a statement that other jurisdictions have enforced that, but no examples of other jurisdictions were given, so I don't think that's pertinent. The fact that Ms. Walsh said that the elevator contractors aren't held responsible for this in the two cases we talked about, West High School and Diamond Mall, our permit wasn't closed until that was taken care of. So if that's something that's going to change, that's progress, right? But fundamentally, the issue here is we enforce codes as written unless they're amended locally, properly. And when you have any building code or electrical code or anything like that, words like shall mean shall, not maybe or maybe not, you know. And in this case, this code is adamant that this section 229.1 is for new installations only. That's not ambiguous. And I don't believe subject to interpretation. If the municipality feels strongly enough that something needs to be done, then the avenue to do that is to do a local amendment and change it. That's their prerogative. And I almost go to the point of saying I would support that. Although, like Mr. McCall mentioned, if we're going to do something like that, I'd like to see, involve the community, right? But, and I really believe that. When this says it applies to new elevators only, how do you interpret that? That's pretty clear to me. And you can change it with a local amendment, and that's entirely possible. Mr. Ryan's mentioned several times that the code's changed. The code did change, and it changed in 2000 edition of the code when there was a harmonization between the Canadian code and the American code. There was the A17.1 and the B44, which was B44 was the Canadian standard, and they were for a long time the two entities always worked together towards the code, but they had their own code book. So in 2000 they harmonized the two codes together, and at that time is when that 229.1 requirement came in. And I deal with codes a lot. I'm sure other people do. The ability to sit here or be able to or allowed to speak to the intent of a code is not something that anybody can do. I mean, that shouldn't be taken lightly, and I don't believe it is, but there's been some talk to what the intent of the code is, and that's a slippery slope, I think. I mean, it comes up a lot at the various code meetings and stuff, and then, matter of fact, the Standards Committee really shies away from doing intended interpretations because of that fact. They're stuck on this, all elevators in the building. And if, I'm a superintendent, I work on elevators, my guys build elevators. He's an inspector, you guys are who you are. This gentleman is, regardless if he was an Otis employee, he is he's a professional engineer. He is our worldwide manager of codes. He's the chairman of both committees that are responsible for the language we're talking about. And I think that where he says it doesn't apply to existing elevators really holds weight. Forget my opinion. I think that really needs to be considered. And, if we, I don't want to make this a big deal or anything. I believe that we all, Mr. Ryan, Sharon, everybody, all you people, we want to do things to keep buildings and elevators safe and anywhere. And wouldn't ever do anything to jeopardize that safety. And we've worked together to do some good things for elevators and escalators in this town. I'd really like to see us get back to what we went away from, even though I'm going to be retiring, which is a elevator board, so you can get together, discuss things like this. And I think if at the beginning of this, 5 years ago, if it was felt strongly enough that a local amendment would have been written, and that was enforceable, and an avenue for it to get done through a building owner or something, then we'd probably all be somewhere else drinking green beer instead of here. That's it.
Thank you.
Unless you have any questions.
Mr. Colleen.
In your statement 2.29, you're saying only applies to new elevators because of 1.1.3.
Correct.
That's what you did. So if that only applies to new elevators, why do you ever have to label an elevator?
Well, you don't, only in the case of new elevators or an alteration of group of elevators. You don't, like Jalen mentioned, there's elevators, lots of them out there that aren't labeled. That would be something a local amendment could do. And that, if it's a good idea or enhances safety for a minimal cost, that's probably not a bad idea to make a part of the local amendment. But that's when there's new ones or you alter a group.
So is it your belief that Section 8.7 is about alterations, or is it about alterations and new? I don't have the full code, but I believe 8.7
is alterations.
Alterations. So alterations reference you to the 2.29. And that's what makes you have to label them to me. So in one hand, you're saying that 2.29 does not apply to existing elevators, but in 8.7, it does apply. They've referenced you back to that. And in the statement from Mr. McCall, he even says that. So I'm a little confused by his verbiage that he's stating 8.7, which according to 1.13 applies to both new and existing installations. And he says that because if you go back to 1.13, it does leave out section 2.29. It explicitly does. And it says the code applies to new installations only, except for part 1, 510, 8.1, 8.6, 8.7. So that's what the key was for me, is it just said that except 8.7. 8.7 is the alterations. So when alterations then tells me I've got to label according to 2.29, that's how I'm following the code's loop that gets me to where I'm feeling like the reason that their interpretation went the way they did and the way the states went and the way they haven't clarified it is because they feel like the code loop is here. But maybe I'm reading from an NEC version. We're used to these loops that are very complicated, and maybe that's misapplying it, but that's how I read it, is that, yes, 1.13 excludes it. 2.29 would be for only new. However, in 8.7, since 8.7 is one of the sections listed as that it applies for new and existing, 8.7 referenced me right back to the one place where it talks how to label elevators.
If I believe you'll see in the future that in a group or in a building is going to be changed to in a group. And in fact, in my testimony before, the example of keying of elevators for fire service, that I'm not going to read it here, but that scenario is very similar, or not, if not the same. And I think that's a good point. You're used to the electrical code, I'm used to the elevator code, and I would not. I'd probably be, get into the 14th page of the electrical code and be really confused. What it means is when new elevators are installed, it means new elevators. Doesn't mean existing elevators. And when it's in 8.7 and it refers you back there to it, it means all elevators being altered. It doesn't say that, but
that's that doesn't say that, and so I'm looking for that.
But that's what's understood by the elevator and the elevator code committee, the communities, that the people that make the code could have been better. Could have been better worded, and it probably will be in the future. But that's in effect what David's saying here. That's what it means. And in his position, it's come from us to say that's what it means. And please take my word for it.
Well, I'm applying logic to what I'm reading, and that's how I'm ending up back to where I was, is that it's just the logic and what I think that this is saying.
But if you apply that logic, so I put one new elevator in a building with 20 elevators, I only have to number one, but if I modernize one of those elevators, I got to do the other 19. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I thought that this applies to new elevators already. 2.29 already applies to new elevators.
Right, but what I'm saying is you have a building with 19 elevators in it already, you put one new one in.
Right.
By this standard, you would have to number that one elevator, right?
Yeah, but you have to.
Because it's the new one.
All elevators.
Oh, new elevators. If you put a new elevator in a building with 19 existing elevators, you would have to number the new elevator per the code. It's probably a better idea, but again, I'd look for the better idea section of the code for a long time. If you go and alter one of those 19 elevators, if it was part of a group, the amount of elevators in that group would be required to be numbered, not the rest of the old ones and not the new one. It's confusing, I agree.
2.29 doesn't say, I don't see it saying anything about a group. It just says in the building.
No, but in the alteration section, you have to read the whole thing.
I don't have the full alterations.
Well,
That's why I was looking at the beginning, is because I felt like it was important.
alterations are, there wasn't a section, an alteration section of the code until, I don't remember, but for a long time. So what was happening was, for existing elevators, AHJs were trying to enforce what brand-new elevators had to comply with, and it was a disaster. I mean, there was a lot of cases where it was impossible. You had to tear it out and put a new one in. And the elevator code committee for the longest time has tried to not stick their nose into electrical codes or building codes or anything, except where necessary or invited. Case in point is firefighters operation elevators, which there's talk of a new building in town that's going to be high enough where there's going to have to be special elevator lobbies and firefighters apparatus, and there's a whole gamut of stuff that takes off after, I think it's 150 feet or something like that. But so I think the reason it ends up being confusing sometimes is because there's nobody other than elevator gurus sitting around and not somebody to say, hey, you know what? I'm not as deep into this as you guys, but it didn't make much sense, but, and it's a work in progress. I do believe that, well, you can see in the example of my first testimony where the same words, all elevators in a building, were confusing as far as the fire key switch for elevators go, and the code was changed to all elevators in a group. And little sideline to that is, it amazes me that it took the elevator community that long to come up with a common key, no matter who made the elevators. I mean, that was a great idea, too long in the making, but that's a little off subject.
Why did we not get, if you were going to get this interpretation, why didn't you get it from ASME? I guess I'm saying it would have carried more weight with me if he would have written this and with his peers in the group would have responded to it rather than Otis for Otis.
Well, because the interpretation would take 4 years to get, I mean, this isn't some guy that I called up and say, hey, I want to win this. I mean, he's our worldwide director of codes. That's his, we could ask for an interpretation, but I know, well, I shouldn't say it, no. I know that, or I suspect that some of the answers we'd get if that interpretation was presented would be that some of the more hard-headed members of the committee would say, look, it says only new. Why are you wasting our time asking us, What would that be right? I don't know, but and if it was able to be walked through, I think again, I'm just, generalizing, but I could expect the answer to come out, if it wasn't that, to be that, that it really meant this, and then in the next edition, we're changing it based on TN, after votes and all that, so. It would literally take years. We've done several.
Okay. If I may, for clarification, the section 2.29.1, that's the only place that spells out the identification of equipment, is that correct? The how and what to...
There's other...
It seems like everything that we've talked about so far hinges on this 2.2.
Well, there's other sections that...
The type of installation or retrofit.
There's other sections that require different kinds of labeling, manufacturing and stuff, but identification.
But this is where it tells you
to identify those types of items, yeah. I think I guess the outcome I'd like to see, if I may, would be if you feel that strongly about it, write a local amendment tomorrow or whenever you got around to it, clarify it, and the fact that the elevator contractor or the general contractor wouldn't be responsible for it is probably the proper avenue to take. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. If we're going to force building owners to number elevators just because, and the outcome is they get numbers on them, but the numbers that we're forcing them to apply don't benefit the emergency personnel, then why? That's the reason it's in the code. It's for the benefit of safety of the elevator personnel and emergency personnel.
Any additional questions?
Mr. Chair, I know we need to wrap this up, but Mr. Fosberg would like to make one comment to that, if
Mr.
that's
Fosberg?
allowed.
I'll allow it.
It seems to me, when following what Eric and those guys went through, I mean, they're using the same NEC logic, and I think it applies when I've looked at this code, not using the elevators. The elevators are under me, under the electrical section, so I reviewed this at that time too. To me, it seemed very clear. I know you keep stating that it's not clear or it's confusing. I didn't think there was any ambiguity to it. I thought the sections were pointed out. It actually refers you directly back to it. The area that is identified in that section is the area of your code that tells you where to identify. So where else would you point? So to me, it was very clear. And the point when you say that it's an emergency issue, I think you presented the case yourself. In a building in the same building, if you had two elevators numbered, number one, what is the fire department supposed to do when a person is saying I'm injured? I think it is a very clear path. Can you find a different route by reading more into it? Yes, but I think it simply states it once you follow the code path. And I don't use that every day as much as the elevator guys do or as much as you do, but applying the logic of the other codes, it seems to be clear. And it seems to be an emergency issue if they're not labeled consistently. And it only is applied when certain things are triggered in 8.7, and then it points back to the 2.9.
Well, understand that there could be a case where two elevators could be numbered the same, and there wouldn't be a whole lot you could do about it code-wise. I would like to think that the community, being the companies, the AHJ, and the owners, would recognize that somebody bring it up and come to an agreement and number it correctly. And that would be cooperation, right? The confusing part of 8.7 is confusing you, because in both cases, what we're talking about is we installed a new elevator, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not confused by it. It points you back to identification.
But if you allow me to continue, I'll explain what I mean. When you're in 229, and you're installing a new elevator, that's it, you stop there, right? So you would agree that if you're just doing a new elevator and there's 20, 31 other elevators in that building, then it only applies to the new one, right?
No, I do not agree. I believe,
Point of order, we need to be going through the chair, and the chair needs to
Yeah, and I think
direct
we're
that.
going to get into,
Right.
the two of you arguing back and forth without
Oh, I don't
bringing
wanna-
new evidence.
I don't wanna
or
argue.
report, So, any other questions for either side? Mr. Cowling?
I would add that in 2.29, 2.291, the sentence is what I'm hung up on, and I might be misinterpreting, but in buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a unique alphabetical numeric identification. So is what I feel like I'm seeing on that, just so you guys, when you're trying to decide how to interpret this, in the world of identifying electrical items, if this is one new elevator we put in a building, I would read that as I put one in and I've got 8 others. It says in buildings with more than one elevator. It doesn't say if they're new or they're existing or what they are. To me, that's saying I have to sort this labeling issue out so that it's safe. That's what I'm reading. And you know, I tend to read codes to the you know, probably the maximum, because I feel like I want to make it safe and I don't want to be looked at as shortcutting anything. So I could be overreading it, but what the words say to me says I have to do all of the elevators in the building. Now, you can argue about what's the building, if it's towers, if it's areas, but I feel like everything that's deemed in that building would be under that, whether it's you're doing modernizations or whether you're putting one new one in. The existing ones would fall under the in buildings with more than one elevator. That was the point I was saying.
Can I respond to that, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Steele, do you have a question, or is it?
I think I have a point of order I'd like to raise here, and I think we're starting to get into an area of maybe discussing findings of facts or considerations.
That was my concern too, is I wanted.
What's being said is fine, but it
I want to
shouldn't
close
be now.
public hearing at this point, I think, so we can move into discussions, unless anybody from the board has any questions.
Technically, it's not a public hearing. Technically, what you're doing is calling an end to the
going by my
presentations.
script. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate a chance to just make a short.
Very quick.
Okay, so in section 2.29, forget 8.7, forget it. Doesn't come into play. In both the instances in the contracts that we did that we're talking about, they were new elevators. That section's for new elevators. You never get to section 8.7. Where we're getting hung up is, and that would be the new elevator. Agree? Where I think we're getting off path here is when you do an alteration and you go to 8.7 and it refers you back. That doesn't now mean that, when I did new elevators, I should have done them all. I mean, you got to follow the logic stream, and it's bordering on illogical. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question.
Mr. Steele.
I think one thing that I'm going to first do a little intro before the question is, when we have an appeal or an interpretation, the onus is on the appellant to provide the compelling information to carry the day.
I understand.
And we're hearing a lot of discussion of you've got a lot of experience, you've got a lot of years, and I respect that. But I didn't, in anything other than maybe the letter from Otis Elevator Head, or Worldwide Head, that really spoke to this 2.29 and quote, it's only for new. All I've got is information in the packet from the city highlighting these sections. So I guess I'm offering one last chance, is what is the compelling reason for me to understand that this 2.29 is not applicable?
1.1.3 states that Part 2 applies to new installations only.
So I go back to 1.13.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one page that has a reference on that. No, it's on the packet before. And I'm just, you may come down if you want to look at this, but I'm reading 1.3 of application of parts. This code applies to new installations only. So far, you're on solid ground. Then it goes on, except Part 1 and 510, 81, 86, 87, 88, 89, 810, and 811 that apply to both new and existing installations. Now, are you telling me that that is saying that that exception doesn't bring those into play?
No. Oh, no. Do you see Section 2 noted in there?
Pardon?
Section 2 is not in that. There's a whole bunch of them. Section 2 isn't. That's the point. 1.1.3 says, among other things, Part 2 applies to new elevators only, except, and then when you look at the except part, Part 2 is not.
I included that language in 2 for us. All I've got here is stuff from the city. I don't have anything showing me 2, I don't believe.
Yes, sir. It's in the, oh, yeah, it's. Is the.
However.
Where is this from? This again,
I think the original.
I'm asking, I'm getting confused here because we've got
Okay.
handouts. Which is the part of your packet and which is the part of the city's? Is this part of your packet, Mr. Bender?
No.
It's part of the cities.
That's part of the city's, but you didn't present this, correct?
I believe that's.
Thank you.
The original application for appeal or whatever, is that in there?
Mm-hmm.
That should, I mean, that's exactly what it was on, so.
And that goes to,
The cities.
that's it. This is all that Mr. Bender provided.
Correct.
Right. So all we have from you, Mr. Bender, is a total of 11 pages and a receipt for your payment for the credit card sale of the appeal.
No, you have the original appeal, the document that started the whole,
I take it back, and we've got.
and that's where,
We've got these 2 elements as well.
no, well, part of the municipal thing is what we, the whatever this form is called. To where we,
Maybe I just need to ask a question of staff to get clarification, and maybe the attorney, but the appeal process, you file the form, then it's your responsibility to present your case and your reasoning why we should support you. So all I've got from you, other than your testimony, is the 9 pages and these 2 Otis elevator cover pages. So that's,
no, you have to, you have to take into account the original appeal that we applied that started this whole thing, which is part of the municipal pact. This,
I think that's it, isn't it?
no,
That is it. That's the appeal. Yeah, 9 pages. So what you said here is the same thing you said tonight, is Part 2 applies to new elevator installations.
I didn't say it, the code says it.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to.
Oh, I know.
I'm not trying to bully anyone.
I'm
I'm just getting frustrated that we're rendering a decision here that is.
And I appreciate that. And the fact is, it is, boy, we could stay here for a week. I think everybody, Jalen would even agree with that. But the back page of this is where the 1.1.3 states that Part 2 applies to new elevator installation only. The building official has decreed that by interpretation 229.1 applies to existing elevators as well. The rule is not ambiguous and thus not open to interpretation, rather must be changed by regulation or published policy between adoption of regulations. And Part 2 applies to new elevators only per 1.1.3. I don't know all the other sections which are maintenance and testing and all kinds of stuff. are included in that verbiage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Scully?
I think the part that probably is getting some of us is that I see your point that it was excluded from 1.1.3. That section is not included in that. But there's a nuance of, I think, code law that things are applicable by reference. And I think that's what the people that deal with codes or the other codes, IBC, NEC, by reference can make something apply. I think if you had to, if every place in a code, you had to list every single thing that could possibly apply in a situation like this, it would become so long and cumbersome you couldn't maintain it. So they use it by reference. So it says that this 8.7, for instance, is this renovation type work, that it is applicable to both new and existing installations. So when you go there and you read what it says to do, it refers you back to, for labeling, back to that 2.29.
So perhaps we dug way too deep into this thing, because the request for this hearing was for whether 229.1 applied only to new elevators. We weren't talking about alteration. The projects we're talking about are new elevators. So if we maybe we should have never gone down the path to get into 8.7, because it's, it is confusing. But so if we back up.
That makes sense. I agree with you on that. So if I read the language for just that, I go, let's see how the references go here, if I can find it, and we can do that. So 1.3, got to find the right one. Okay, 2.29. So I'm doing a new elevator, and I do 1.13, and it says, okay, new, I got to do 2.29. Okay, and I go to 2.29 and go, okay, I got to find out what we have to do to label this elevator. And the language is, in buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a unique alphabetical or numerical identification.
But you're in a section that...
It doesn't say anything about...
It does, because you're in a section that only applies to new installations.
Mr. Chair, could I respectfully ask that we draw a line between deliberations of the board and questions of the...
I've been trying to get there too. And then somebody says, I got a question, and they get in board deliberations.
But Eric, if you will, Mr. Chairman, Eric, if you're in that section and it applies to new elevators only, why would you go read the rest of the code to see if something has to do with the existing elevators? There's no reason to go there. It's new elevators, stop, right?
I'd like to close testimony at this time and turn it over to the board for discussion. I think we've heard enough that we can make our decisions based on this. Mr. Ferdinand.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, so we normally would then need a motion to go into this, except I have one clarifying question. What are we trying to do a motion on? Are we trying to, the appeal here, the first sentence of that says...
I can help with that. The motion is whether or not to uphold the interpretation of the authority having jurisdiction, whether or not to uphold the interpretation.
Okay, so, but I've got two parts here. I've got the first sentence here that says, I'm sorry, through the chair. A17.1 as adopted, 1.13 states that Part 2 applies to new elevator installations only. So we've had one debate that says Part 2 doesn't apply to existing. Then we also have the other part, which I think is more of the meat, but I don't want to miss the interpretation here, which is under Section 2.29, are the words, I had it written down at one point, are the words the existing, are the words all elevators include existing? I mean, is that the basis of what our motion should be, is that, is the verbiage within 2.29 apply to all new and existing boards?
Mr. Chair? The interpretation, if you go back to the email where the interpretation is stated, the interpretation is simply that installation of a new elevator does trigger labeling for all elevators in a building. And this interpretation will be rigorously noted from here forward on other projects. That's the interpretation. whether or not these actions trigger the labeling.
Was this under one of the summary of issues? I need help on a motion to define exactly what we're saying.
Mr.
Yes or
Steele?
no on.
Well, I guess,
If I can clarify, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet in the summary of issues. That development services is interpreted A17.1 2010 to mean that any new installation or modernization project triggers a need for all elevators in a building to be numbered, not just the elevator being installed or modernized. That's the interpretation. And that I would respectfully note that the job here tonight is either uphold that or overturn it based on what you heard from the appellant.
could I have that repeated relative to the application? So I can follow the application which was accepted by the Muni?
Application for appeal, the appellant's words were interpretation of A17 2010 2.29.1.
So
If you'll notice, the interpretation
if
wasn't specific to 2.29.1.
I'd like to make this interactive so I can follow. The 2.291 is the first entry, which is below the street address and has a series of A through E questions relating to, it appears, the construction. So is that the interpretation? Why is it entered or accepted as an interpretation relative to construction?
No, it would be that the interpretation is the email.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand this form, which is the Muni's form. The first section seems to be describing at what state the construction is in, doesn't deal with interpretation.
Correct.
And so that's where the 2.291 is entered. Then we go to the next paragraph, which is, this appeal is based on the action of the building official or fire official who claims that. And then the only thing is interpretation of email dated 12/18/15, and that's what you referenced?
The first entry was under E. The first item E is incorrectly filled out by the applicant, basically. The status of construction should have really said.
But I think the Muni has a role in getting this stuff correct before it moves on. And so we then get to the third paragraph, which is the actual basis or what's being appealed, isn't it? Which is back to A 17.1210, 1.113.
The third part of the application is the appellant's reasons for making the interpretation. It's not the interpretation itself.
Okay.
So I would.
So now if you could help me back to the email reference that is going to close the deal for me.
Okay, so I would go back to the email reference being,
And I'm looking at your numbered pages
Right.
here.
so it would be page 1 of 9,
1 of 9?
as labeled in the email. The email from me.
Which is number 3 in the lower right corner.
Correct.
Okay, that one.
So it would be my email to Mr. Bender and to Victor Fosberg with copies to Mike Liebing, Chris Schutte, and Andrew Harris. And it's basically, the interpretation boiled down is the first sentence in the second paragraph. The department's interpretation, the installation of a new elevator does trigger labeling for all elevators in the building still prevails. It's more succinctly stated in terms of actual policy, modernization also. And that's more succinctly stated in the sixth bullet in the summary of issues.
So with that statement, would it be fair to put in place of paragraph 2, just for an understanding, that you're speaking to A 17.1-210, comma, 2.29.1?
No, the,
It seems that that's the
the
only...
interpretation was intended to be inclusive of all applicable parts of 2010, so A 17.1, 2010. That taken in total, A 17.1 to 2010 has been interpreted to mean that any new installation or modernization project triggers a need for all elevators in a building to be numbered, not just the elevator being installed or modernized. So again, that's the first sentence of the sixth bullet in the summary of issues.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Straight.
I'd like to make a stab at this, and I'd like to move that the building board affirms the appeal BC-I-01-2016. And by affirming this, we are stating that the building board, or the Municipality Development Services interpretation of A 17.1-2010, their interpretation which states that any new installation of modernization project triggers the need for all elevators in a building to be numbered, not just the elevator being installed or modernized, that would be overturned. So by affirming this, by voting yes, we're overturning their interpretation of A 17.1-2010 and agreeing with the appellant. Capture what we're trying to do.
Positive to the appellant. I have a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Severin can help us with this. I'm not sure that that's a positive motion. I believe it has to be in the form of a positive motion, which is up to uphold the interpretation, and then a no vote would not uphold the interpretation. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I got my verbiage through our regulations where it talks about what we're supposed to do at this point, which is we're going for an affirmative vote of the majority to affirm the motion to affirm the appeal. So my appeal is we affirm the appeal. The
Okay.
appeal is...
You're speaking to AMCR 23. I'm sorry, I don't have that with me tonight, but okay.
I can absolutely share it with you.
I'll stand corrected.
It's just the way it's worded there. It talks about affirmation.
He made a positive motion in favor of the appellant in this case.
That is correct. Would you like to see my copy?
Not yet. Looking for a second.
I'll second it.
I got a couple of them. Let's give Mr. Feller a chance here. Moving second. Discussions. Mr. Straight, would you like first discussion?
Sure. So I've made the motion in the affirmative. However, I do have to follow that up to say that I will not be supporting my motion, and the reason for that is that, as was stated at the very beginning of the staff's introduction, the building officials' rights and duties include interpretation of the code based on what they feel is the intent and purpose of the code. So they're fully within their realms of doing that. And then looking at all that we've talked through, in my mind, it boils down to between section, I'm not going to quote the whole numbers, but between the section 1 and the section 2 parts, how you really filter that in your mind. So you can read section 1, which says section 2 applies to new elevator installation. You go to section 2, you read that part which says, I really got to have that in front of me. Here we go. Thank you. So you read section 2.29.1, which says, in buildings with more than one elevator, each elevator in the building shall be assigned a new unique alphabetical, et cetera, et cetera. So if you read that independently of anything else, just by itself, which I believe is the way the code is intended, is in this case it says for new construction you go here in a building with multiple elevators, each one must be assigned. It doesn't say only new elevators, it says in a building with multiple, they all got to be done. Another way to interpret this is you can read section 1, which says this section 2 only applies to new elevators, so you can read section 2.29.1 through that filter and state that it doesn't say only new elevators, but it means only new elevators. So my point with all that is I fully think that this can be interpreted multiple ways. So when you have a scenario that the code reads that way, it falls to the building official, the HJ, to make the interpretation. And I believe their interpretation in this case, first of all, it doesn't place undue expense on any party. And second of all, it upholds the real true intent of all of this, which is building safety. So based on that, I feel that their interpretation is correct, and I will not be supporting the motion.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Feller.
So I will be supporting the motion, and my reason is when I read the information that was submitted in the elevator code, I don't see anything in there that requires work to be done on an elevator that is not either new or being altered. I've heard some commentary tonight like you could end up with 2 elevators labeled number 1. But I don't see that as true, because anytime you alter an elevator or add a new elevator, you have to give it a unique number. And I just don't see anything in the code that requires it, that the sections being referenced apply to new elevators. And the other part of my reasoning is we've got we've got this letter from David McCall, who is the chairman of the ASME committees that are responsible for these sections that we're debating here tonight, who's made an interpretation, and that carries a lot of weight with me. And for those reasons, I will be supporting the motion.
Mr. Field.
Yeah, I guess that I'm on board with Troy. When I read section 2.29, it is under the new elevator code, and that's what intended. I mean, it'd been really nice if they would have put each new elevator in there, so for all us dummies, we'd really understand it. And I also believe when you reference back to 8.7, that applies only to the elevators that you're fixing or that are being altered or whatever it is. It doesn't mean to me that you go back and number every elevator in there. And I also believe that some weight needs to be given to Dave McCall, who wrote this interpretation based on what his responsibilities are on ASME A17. But I also would strongly support an amendment to this code so that we can make it the way that you want to make it. But seems to me it should even go further, because if you have all these elevators out there that are unnumbered, that are supposedly this dangerous, why aren't we doing something about those too? I mean, if it's not really a cost issue, then why don't we take up something and do something about that instead of waiting till they make changes to do it? It seems like it's as much of a dangerous issue as they sit than it is just doing it whenever an alteration or a new elevator is installed. But I agree that for me it was difficult to make it through it all, but I believe that 2.29 is specifically for new, and 8.7 is specifically for those alterations, and it references back to 2.9 for the numbering purpose only. So I will be supporting the motion.
Mr. Ferdine.
Mr. Chair, I'll be voting in favor of the motion as well for a couple reasons. One, I wish all code language is very clear, and I think unfortunately ASME took a shortcut on theirs. But looking at, we first started off about not having the code with us to look at the body. But when I look at these sections within 8.7, the cadence of them, of the surrounding sections, are very much point to this. I mean, for instance, brakes shall conform to 2.24. Let's see, what are some other stuff here? The capacity and loading shall conform to 2.16. The terminal stopping devices shall go to 2.25. Operating devices, they reference to another section within 2. And so just by the cadence of saying, hey, you got to upgrade this part, go see 2 point such and such. You got to see this, go see this part. And so when it gets down to emergency operate, or when it gets down to the identification, it says the modified elevator has to be identified in accordance with 2.29. Taking that into consideration with all the other previous ones, I could see how the interpretation could easily be that only applies to the one that we're being modified. The verbiage within 2.29 where it does use each elevator in the building shall be assigned to a unique alphabetical number, I think that verbiage is necessary for the new installation requirements. It's kind of hard to say the two different scenario whether you're modifying or not. So I do see the possibility this could be interpreted as being just for new and not for existing. It does kind of look like, I mean, I agree, I wish the Otis thing came from ASME. That would have helped. But however, the discussions between staff and the appellant clearly note this is a safety issue. Because this is not a particular case that we will have West High or Diamond Center be at risk of a life safety issue, I don't have a problem saying we don't, that this interpretation is not the way that the Muni says, because there is an easy out, and I really would request a policy be written on this so that it's cut and dried, all known, the design teams know about it. I mean, it's an easy solution, something that can get written up really quick, and no lives are at risk at this point tonight if we just say, please write a policy, and it'll be done.
Mr. McKee.
I just wanted to point out that in 2.29.1, in order to establish a unique identifier, the other elevators have to be reviewed for their identification. And they could be all correct, and you may not have to do anything to them, but to establish a unique identifier for the new installation, you have to reference those.
Mr. Steele.
Yes, I'll be opposed to the appeal, and I think, to me, in all the years in dealing with code languages, what I've been presented in the packet tonight is pretty clear that 8.7, which takes you straight back to 2.29, talks about more than one elevator and each elevator in the building. And we can all infer that new is maybe the case, but it's not stating new in my mind, because there's a lot of other sections that take you back to the new section, and that is just so a book that's already this thick isn't this thick. And this, again, is another reference back here that says 2.29 tells you what has to be done with the identification. And I think 1.13, as I pointed out, it does give an exception to recognizing 8.7. So it is, in fact, giving you ground to understand that 8.7 carries the weight of having some influence in this section. And the fact all these other highlighted references are telling you specifically what is required, I think is logical interpretation. And again, as the maker of the motion stated, the building official is making an interpretation, and from what I've seen tonight, it's supportable in my mind of the interpretation that's been made. I think in some of the conversations, there's been discussion of a period of years that this has been in place. It seems to me that it would be hard for the industry to not be tuned into that. In fact, if that's the case, I have no reason to one party saying it has been the case, and I didn't hear the contrary to that. So I think there's history here that is basically saying that this interpretation has been utilized for a few years. Now, in terms of next steps, yes, a policy would maybe be in order, and perhaps contacting Mr. McCoyle to suggest that if he feels it's that clear that it's only new, that all they have to do is add a couple of words in that 2.29, and it's clear as a bell, but those words don't exist. So I can't be supporting this appeal based on what I've summarized. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I'll throw in,
Mr. Lowe.
throw in my towel here. I'm back and forth. I'm code fries me more than anything. You know, if we want to get into this unique, there can be two ones that are unique. I mean, you could drill this thing to the, you know, you could have a big one and a little one. In some reference, those are still unique in themselves. So, even though they're both ones, you have a blue one and a green one. I don't want to be the chicken, but I'm torn. I think I'm gonna have to abstain. So.
Speaking for myself, I will not be supporting it. I've thought about this a long time, since I was on the three-member panel. I've been using logic that if it was elevators within a control area, I would expect those to be labeled, not just one car because one car went through an upgrade, but all of them because they're within that control area. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And I don't see anything in the code that says within a control area. So if I want them for the bank of 6, I have to do them for the building. And I can't separate out because the code hasn't given me anything. Our charge is we cannot change the code. We have to enforce the code and interpret the code. And I haven't been given anything that can push me away from, you know, I can't get some anywhere in this thing. And when we were at the three-member, I tried and tried and tried, but I couldn't find it then either. So I will not be supporting the measure. Anybody else? That being said, I'll close this and I'll call for vote.
Mr. Field,
I support the motion.
Mr. Cowling,
I do not support.
Mr. Straight. Do not support. Mr. McCann,
I do not support.
Mr. Feller,
I do support the motion.
Mr. Ferdine,
Support the motion.
Mr. Steele,
No.
Mr. Loken,
Abstain.
Mr. Hawkinson,
Yes, I support it.
Mr. McKee,
I do not.
Mr. Brady,
I support it.
and Mr. Bowie.
No.
With one abstaining, the vote is 5 yes to 6 nay.
As I understand the rules, it's a majority, so it's not passed in favor of the appellant. It's in favor of the municipality. Either party does have the opportunity to appeal this to the judicial system. I thank you for your time and for your attention.
Can I make a statement?
Quickly, please.
This has been an interesting process. It really has, and I really appreciate everybody's input to this. I think probably the outcome is going to be that what was suggested as a local amendment will make it a lot clearer. And this is part of how due process works, and I'm happy to be a part of it, and absolutely agree with the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quick push, and we can complete. Trying to find my agenda that I've buried 3 times now. Elections.
We're not quite done, guys.
It is our annual meeting and an opportunity to reestablish chairmanship. And Being that, I don't believe we took any nominations ahead of time, did we?
We have not.
So all nominations are from the floor. I'll entertain, starting with the chair, a nomination for chairs. Mr. Fredine.
Nominate Scott Boney for chair.
Second.
Any other nominations for chair? Please? Mr. Steele?
I move for nominations to be closed.
Oh, I second.
Moved and second. Call for vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Come on, Scott, you can oppose.
I'm going to abstain. Anybody else abstaining? Okay, we have a chair, me. And nominations for vice chair. Mr. Fredine.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate Tyler Loken for vice chair.
Moved and seconded. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Sure.
One. Congratulations, Tyler. You're in the hot seat. I'll arrange my vacations accordingly. Reports. And I'm willing to bet the building department has some information for us regarding
Title 23,
Title 23.
correct. And by the way, the staff would like to, on the record, welcome Mr. Brady to the board. We're really pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Be glad to have your perspective. You do a lot of business with us, and it's going to be helpful. Title 23 has had a long and arduous journey before the Assembly. The bulk of it was adopted on March 8th. There were several amendments introduced by Mr. Starr. There was a motion to reconsider the adoption with the amendments. That motion failed. However, in the interim, so Title 23 as adopted that night stands. However, there was an introduction of 3 amendments to the new code, which will be heard at public hearing this coming Tuesday, the 23rd, I believe it is. 22nd. So those 3 amendments have to do with deleting the exemption for unfinished basements and floor protection over unfinished basements, for refining the exemption for a water heater to focus on electric water heaters in single-family or duplex residences that do not require plumbing or piping. So that would be one exception for which a permit would not be required. Right now, the code is adopted the night of the 8th, allowed for no water heaters needing exceptions. No water heaters needing a permit, and on review, that was determined to be not the intent and too broad for the hazards associated with installing water heaters. So that'll be heard on Tuesday night. And then the third thing had to do with fire service areas and establishing a process for appeal. Right now, if you live in an area that's not in the fire service area and there's a wildfire, for example, that comes across your property, you get billed by the fire department for fighting that fire on your property. And it's recognized that in some cases that has nothing to do with the any bad acts by the owner of that property, and there should be a process for appeal. So the next amendment establishes that process, appealing to the fire chief. So there may be one other one having to do with fire service areas, but that's being added right now, if it's going to be added at all. And I want to emphasize, this is a whole new ordinance, so this is a new public hearing, and so if anyone has comments on any of those three issues, they'll be able to testify on Tuesday night.
Was there
And
any
I should
discussion
say
about?
the remainder of the adoption takes effect April 1st. No fooling.
You said that before. Was there any discussion about the partial height blocking at all?
My understanding is there will be no amendment coming forward on that with this ordinance. I should also mention, so that's what's going on that. I should also mention there is a significant change in the new Title 23 that reverts to half-hour inspections. It discusses half-hour inspections, and that is not being revised. What it basically says, bear with me 1 second, is that for alterations, additions, change of use, the fee is $75 per inspection per half hour with a minimum half-hour charge per inspection. So, in other words, alterations will be, additions, change of uses will be charged by half-hour increments at $75. So, then on that same language is in the basic inspection fees and in the unscheduled or reinspection. Unscheduled each are half-hour with a half-hour minimum, and that's $115 for a half-hour. That's been reduced from the hourly at $230. So the point I want to mention is it will be per half-hour increment, not per inspection. So we'll be working with the inspection group, and for those of you who haven't met Hans Giesler, he's our chief of inspections. And we'll be working with the inspectors to have a time tracking. They'll have to do it by hand for the first few weeks, but we're moving quickly to switch to the Henson Mobile inspector software, and they'll be able to timestamp when they leave an inspection and, are starting on the next one, arriving at the next one, and when they leave that one. So we'll have a timestamp, we'll have some reports. It's going to be a bit of a bureaucracy, but we'll figure it out. So, but I just wanted to heads up that that's how it's going to be charged now with the new ordinance.
Through the chair, what are we? Is there things being done, Hans? I can list a structural inspector that takes an hour to inspection, and I can list another one that same inspection takes him about 20 minutes. It's gotten better, but we probably know kind of who we're speaking of. There are some structural inspectors that, regardless if they're new, they struggle to get an inspection done in a timely manner. So when you have, I know we try to push consistency, but we're still seeing that in the field. So when we come to paying for inspections, it's maybe more of a note or just a item to make sure we work on. That's been an issue. So I guess maybe more of a note than a question. But what do you do in an instance like that where you can have an owner or a contractor that the inspection shouldn't, if they say it should take that long, but yet we have the same inspection being done by others that take a much shorter time, then where's the right one?
Well, we always get requests for certain inspectors on certain jobs, but the inspectors have their areas, and we cannot just let one inspector, let's say from the west side, somebody from the hillside wants them. It just is not in there, for just traveling time. So they have their assigned areas, and we have training classes at least once a week to get all the inspectors up and running, to the latest standards and the latest codes. Yeah, there are some. If you're new in the inspection, you obviously you don't know as much as a guy that's been there for 20 years. I mean, that's just a learning curve. And so we're trying to move them around, in different areas, so not everybody gets, the same inspector all the time.
And as we train new inspectors, they shadow someone else.
Right.
We don't charge extra for their time.
No.
They're, when they're in training mode, it'd still only be per inspection, whether there's 2 inspectors on it or not. So that's, one way we want to get a guy up to speed before we turn him loose on his own. So it's something we're going to have to work on, and to get the timestamp together with the, just the training curve. We're going to have to do our best to get it as quickly as we can. On the flip side, as you know, I've been to, I can think of at least one visit to your jobs, and I, hear all the time about particular, the same thing goes for contractors. We have contractors that have their job ship shape ready to look at. Doesn't take long to inspect it. And then you have the ones that are a mess, that they can't even see half the things they're supposed to be looking for, and, well, that's going to cost extra, and maybe rightly so. So hopefully everyone knowing the time's being tracked a little more precisely, it'll help everyone kind of get to a good standard. Maybe you couldn't give classes, Tyler.
Sharon, are there any changes to express or expedited review?
There was one change. It was, we didn't have a problem with the change. Mr. Starr deleted some language about whether or not we could guarantee immediate availability of the inspectors or the plan reviewers for that.
I think he was confused on which was which. I think he was confused on a lot of things, frankly.
So the options are still there for both. Frankly, we discourage the expedited because that's just we really wanted to take it out of this code. But the expedited is where a person pays extra, I think it's 10% or something, to go into the expedited line. But if everybody's doing that, then the expedited line is a lot longer than the regular line, and it really doesn't serve the purpose. The express review is still available, and that's a much more cost-effective method for a person.
And it's a great, great system. We use it, and I can't tell you how happy I am you guys have that, because it's worth its time.
Yeah,
it really
I think so.
It's
and
excellent.
The other update, and the other update while I'm thinking of it is electronic plan review. We're working with the vendor. They have made 2 visits now. It's going very well, the implementation of that system. They've put it in place in about, I think, almost 24 other jurisdictions. So, and the 2 guys we've been working with, it's just been going very smoothly so far. So the next thing that'll happen the first week of April will be staff training, and then they'll be followed closely by some working with, we're going to choose about 4 customers with kind of consistent customers to be the first trial customers with it and work with them. Then there'll be general training for all customers, and it'll be stood up, available to everyone around the 1st of July. We're shooting to beat that if we can, but and as fast as it's going right now, we're hoping to beat that number. But hopefully by beginning of 3rd quarter, you'll be able to submit plans electronically.
So once this gets up and running, is it going to cut some time out of review time or anything, Sharon?
What the folks are telling us is that your first review is still going to take what it takes. The reviewer still has to get familiar with the plans, understand what the issues are with them, and it's going to take, you're going to see a slight saving just because not handling the paper and everyone can look at it at once and doesn't have to wait till a plan set's back in the cubicle, cubby available to be looked at. So there'll be a little time there, but the big savings is in the subsequent reviews, because The new submittal can come in electronically, be overlaid over the old one. Changes are very clear and apparent, just should really speeds it up. And they're seeing, that's where most jurisdictions are seeing a big savings in time.
So more than one reviewer can review at a time?
Yes, they can. They can all look at it at the same time if they want to.
Well, I would think that would be very helpful.
That's going to help.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, that ends our report. Everybody's still awake? Anybody want some Jameson's? No kidding.
I would like, if we could, just take a moment for each of us to introduce ourselves to Mr. Brady and for Mr. Brady to introduce himself to us real briefly. Starting on the end, I want to catch Mr. Hawkinson's ear real quick here as he writes. Just a little brief, who you are, who you work for, and whatever's of interest to share with that. Mr. Hawkinson. Yep. Hit your mic, please.
My name's Royal Field. I work for Neisser Construction. I'm currently the design build coordinator for Neisser Construction. I've lived here since 1976, and I've worked for Neisser Construction all but one of those years, so I've worked for them for 40 years now. And primarily just do commercial work. Welcome.
My name's Troy Feller. I'm a structural engineer with BBFM Engineers, and I've been a principal with BBFM for 20 years now, and do mostly commercial design.
Hi, CB.
That's it, huh?
We're not introducing ourselves to the board, just CB, so, and I didn't feel like I needed to go through something, so.
I'm Scott Boney with Rim Architects, principal there, and jeepers, I was just looking here, I've been on the board since '04. Greg?
Hi, I'm Craig Ferdine. I work for PDC Engineers. I'm a mechanical engineer on the board.
I'm John Steele, and I work with Bettisworth North Architects. I'm an architect, primary role, however, is project management.
Hi, I'm Sterling Strait. I'm a structural engineer with Manaway Parsons, mostly do industrial, commercial stuff. Steel.
Eric Cowling, we've worked together, electrical engineer and principal at EIC Engineers.
I'm Preston McKee, work for Raven Electric, technical services manager there, electrical administrator.
Don McCann, McCann Plumbing and Heating, mechanical administrator, owner-operator.
Well, I'm CB Brady. I started Benchmark Construction. This is the 10th year, and I know a few of you. I'm not sure I'm super excited or super scared, but thanks for having me.
And I'll let you know, the disclosure forms I passed out, you'll have yours and give that to me or the municipal clerk's office when you go and officially swearing in. It is an ordinance now that every year we have to do these before February 15th. So now that I am officially known and told, I will make sure that come January or February meeting, I'll make sure everyone gets their brand new copy, and if they'll send them to me, and then I'll get them all to the clerk's office. And again, cannot come in through the front doors, those doors in the very back, or exit them because of construction, and they're concerned of your safety. That is the main door, out this exit here, and that way, and that's the only entrance and exit for us. unless, of course, there's a fire, and then you can hit that. No, the day you were actually confirmed by the assembly.
I got a list right here.
So would it be the first or
And I will let you know,
I
there
put
are a
both
few
of
of you up for reappointment come October, so you have until maybe August, September before I'll start bothering you. Mr. Boney is up, Mr. Hickle,
Mr.
Mr. Loken,
Cowling.
Mr. Cowling, Mr. McKee, and Mr. Steele are up for reappointment this year. So if you're thinking about it, please reappoint, and if not, we'll wish you farewell.
Can I make a motion to adjourn and wish us all farewell?
Got a motion? And second, thank you very much, Tana, for providing food and for all you do to support us. Thank you to the Sharon for your support as well. We stand adjourned.